Hello, intrepid internet traveler. I am Fathom, and what follows is a labor of love which has been a big part of my life for about the last 7 months. It is a track-by-track journey through what is, subjectively speaking, one of the greatest albums of all time, Revolver by the Beatles. Ready to jump back in? Excellent. Here is side 2. Chapter 8. Good day, sunshine. Hello and welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where the sun is forming this lovely dappled pattern across my shirt. Today, folks, we are jumping back on the Beatle train. Choo-choo! So we finished side A, and we took about a month's breather so that we could compose ourselves and prepare ourselves emotionally for the journey that is side 2 of Revolver. There were a few donations that were made following the Yellow Submarine episode, which were specifically to fund the making of a papier-mâché Yellow Submarine. Maybe I should make a papier-mâché Yellow Submarine. And we're very close, but I think it'll have to wait until the next Beatles episode. Here's an update anyway. This is what it's looking like. It's approximately the right shape. It's got a little propeller and it's got its little periscopes. So, soon, thanks to those of you who made donations, I've had a ball making this. Enough jibber jabber. Let's listen to some music. This is today's song. Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. Track 1, side 2, Revolver. Picture this, my friends. It's the summer of 1966 in London. It is unseasonably warm. It is endlessly sunny. And on August 5th, I believe, this album comes out. What better song to soundtrack such a summer? A sunny, swinging 60s summer. I did that in one take. Not too shabby. Now, Ray Davies of the Kinks, who contributed his own little ode to this hot summer, in the summertime, raved about this song. He said, and I quote, "This'll be a giant. This is back to the real old Beatles. I just don't think the fans like the newer electronic stuff. The Beatles are supposed to be like the boy next door, only better." Bit of a dinosaur opinion from Ray Davies, but what are you gonna do? Despite Ray Davies' approval, this is actually one of the least popular songs on the album. I took to the Beatles subreddit to get the official word on the street, and this was ranked their 3rd least favorite song on this album, after Yellow Submarine and another track that we haven't gotten to yet. Most of the complaints centered around this song not being up to the standard of the rest of the songs on the album. The lowest score was 6.8, which I think just goes to show what an incredibly high-quality album this is, that nothing drops below a 6 out of 10. Most of the songs on this album were ranked in the 8s and 9s. So in that sense, I can kinda see what they're talking about. Other minor gripes included thinking that the song was annoyingly optimistic, that the song was corny like the early Beatles. One person dared to say that the chorus takes away from the verses, and this person, I think it is gloriously obvious, is wrong. So my goal today is to demonstrate that this is a well-written song that is fully deserving of a place on this album. Let's go. We'll start by considering the song alone, in isolation, by itself. When I was 6 years old, a family friend found out that I had a deep love of the Beatles and that my parents were sick of the single cassette that we had of their music. And so I think partly as an act of charity towards my parents, they recorded onto a cassette tape the albums Rubber Soul and Revolver back to back. So for a start, I thought it was a double album for the longest time. This song is one that I adored from the get-go. I think that it is because it's a song that is unapologetically joyful, and it exemplifies everything about this band that makes me happy. Of course, the other reason is that it's a simple, easily digestible piece of music, right? Not exactly. Adult me would argue that this is yet another example of the Beatles hiding really complex musical concepts in an easy, accessible, enjoyable piece of music. So let's jump in there. Now, I'm just a person with an internet connection and opinions. So as far as you're aware, I could be pulling all of this out of my butt. So I've called on my good friend Leonard Bernstein, composer of West Side Story, to lend me a little bit of cred for this episode. So we'll be calling him in occasionally and getting his take on things. First thing of interest about this song is its chords. It doesn't really remain in the same key throughout. So let's pay a quick visit to the piano correspondent for some chord time! Well, hi there. The song begins here. Okay, good. Song's in E, right? Not right. It goes here. Good day, sunshine. Okay, the song's in B. The song is not in B. The verses go here. I need to laugh. Whew, it's a lot of plot twists. But wait, there's one more surprise in store for us. The song modulates up a semitone at the end. Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine.
Now that's not just cheery, it's also very unorthodox.
That's not the behavior of your standard issue pop song now, is it? No, it's not. Next, I'd like to look at some of the rhythmic anomalies of this song. Listen to the timing of this chorus.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine.
So in case for some reason you weren't able to glean the meaning of that very expressive, very personal, interpretive dance, Leonard Bernstein is going to help us out. Count it for us, Lenny!
It suddenly, if you noticed, leaves out a beat.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine.
You see just one sudden bar of 3 among all those 4s. We never used to find that in pop music. It's new.
When I was preparing for this episode, I'd actually listened to the song a couple of times before I even remembered that timing anomaly is a thing, which I think just serves to support the idea I was trying to put forth, that these complexities in music are being wrapped up in this tidy, enjoyable little musical package. It doesn't jump out as something especially erudite or snobbishly intellectual. Not that I have any problem with things that are snobbishly intellectual. I am known to dabble in a little intellectual snobbery in myself. But again, the complaint of many people on Reddit was that the song is too simple. So maybe they hit those concepts too well. Another thing of interest in this song is that it doesn't remain in the same feel throughout the song. We have this very broad, open, free, liberating chorus here.
Good day, sunshine.
It feels very open, right? But then the verse is more of an ambling, buoyant groove. Makes it sound like you're going for a jaunty little walk in the sunshine.
We take a walk, the sun is shining down.
And then the outro is like an exaggeration of that chorus. It's even bigger, even more open. The rhythm drops away.
Good day, sunshine.
Isn't that lovely?
It's tart, pungent.
I feel that in my chest when I listen to it. It is just very emotionally affecting music. I don't know, what do you think? This is also a song that wears its influences on its sleeve while maintaining, to my ears, a fairly timeless quality. If someone put out this song this year, I wouldn't think, my God, how antiquated. It's just a good song. It's just a good, timeless song. Specifically in the verses, we've got that sort of Tin Pan Alley thing that Paul McCartney does.
We take a walk.
That is very old-fashioned. Boom, 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 boom. But I think that Paul, who wrote this song, can't believe I haven't mentioned that yet. Just took it for granted. Whatever. Paul wrote this song at John's house, presumably while he was waiting for John to wake up, because it seems that that's how Paul wrote a lot of songs for this album. John, as he made clear to us, was only sleeping. What was I gonna say? And I think that Paul borrowed this wholesale from his childhood. His dad had a little jazz band.
Fun fact, this photograph largely inspired the cover design for the Sgt. Pepper album. Now you know.
He had other musicians in his family, and they used to get together and have these big sing-alongs. The Storytime correspondent can tell us more about it. Good day to you. We will be taking today's reading from The Good Book. Paul McCartney says, "We always had a piano. My dad was an instinctive musician. I have some lovely childhood memories of lying on the floor and listening to my dad play Lullaby of the Leaves. They were interested in funny time signatures without knowing it. Relevant." Further on, he says, "He'd always play on New Year's Eve. Our family always had big New Year's Eve parties. They were some of the best parties I ever remembered." Eventually, Paul's father would end up getting arthritis, and Paul ended up taking his role as the family pianist at the New Year's Eve parties, where everyone would gather around the piano and sing and shout requests at him, and it sounds like a good time. There's also a sort of barrel house element to it. Barrel house is a genre that originated in the 1870s and eventually turned into what's better known now as boogie woogie, had a huge heyday, between like the 30s and the 50s, which eventually bled into and helped form the kind of early rock and roll that Paul McCartney as a youth was just drinking up. For instance, this solo that George Martin plays has that same jangly, rattly quality that you might hear on a track like Blueberry Hill by Fats Domino. It's a classic early rock and roll track. Or for an earlier example, have a listen to the groove on Honky Tonk Train Blues by Meade Lux Lewis. You can hear it's very similar to what's happening in the piano in the verses here. It's got that boom 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 boom. It's sort of a boogie woogie groove happening. I think the similarities come through. And yet I don't think it sounds corny or hokey because it's offset by this brilliant, bold chorus choice. And to me, this song doesn't have anywhere near as much of an old-timey quality as songs that he would write the following year, like When I'm 64. Or Your Mother Should Know from Magical Mystery Tour.
Let's all get up and dance to a song that was a hit before your mother was born.
This just has hints of it. And in the sort of buoyant, jaunty peppiness of this song, you can hear stirrings of the direction that he's going to go in with songs like Penny Lane.
On the corner is a banker with a motor car.
And Getting Better off Sgt. Pepper's.
I used to get mad at my school.
The last thing I'd like to say about this song on its own is that it evokes two very clear moods to me. The first is simple joy. I find that Paul McCartney's lyrics don't always match up with the tone of his music. If you take an example like Good Times Coming.
That was a golden summer, wasn't it hard?
Similarly to this one, it's about summer, it's about being around people you love, it's about joy. It does not sound like that. It sounds like something awful is about to go down. This song, by contrast, perfectly aligns tone and lyrical content. You know, like when he says,
I'm in love and it's a sunny day.
You as the listener feel like you are the one who's in love on the most gloriously sunny day of the summer. To me, he has written a song that feels like sunshine. That's hard to do. Harness a specific sensation and render it into music, and he has done this on this track because he's a bloody genius. Obviously. Also, the way he sings it fits perfectly into the tone of the song. Like here, when he sings this.
Then we lie beneath the shady tree.
Oh, firstly, he sings it beautifully. Secondly, it's got that sort of happy, languorous tone that you might have if you're having like a post-picnic nap in the dappled shade of a tree in summertime. It has that sort of sleepy, happy, lazy feeling. And so much the better if you're lying next to someone you're in love with. Perfect. The second mood that this song evokes, for me, is rapture. And that happens in the choruses. Listen to how the cymbals, sparkle, glitter. They sound like glitter. Like sunshine.
Good day, sunshine.
The rhythm opens up, the vocals open up. We've got those amazing 3-part harmonies.
Good day, sunshine.
They sound so good when they sing in harmony. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but man, do they sound good. But to me, it couldn't achieve that sort of emotional and spiritual, even elevation, without the more pedestrian nature of the verses. They play against each other beautifully. Just as you transition from the verse into the chorus, it feels sublime.
I'm in love and it's a sunny day. Good day, sunshine.
See what I mean? And I don't mean sublime in the that's great sense. I mean it in the archaic sense. To elevate to a high degree of moral or spiritual purity or excellence. That's what I mean. That's what these choruses feel like to me. And when at the end, they modulate upwards for the outro.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine.
I think think that's nothing short of beatific.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine.
Good day, sunshine. And they're like drowning in reverb. It's heavenly. And they sort of dissolve away.
Good day, sunshine.
What a way to fade out in a new key, a shifting meter, a sudden new counterpoint.
My only gripe is that it's a little bit sloppy in the editing department. Like, you can hear the cymbals cut. Even if you mute cymbals, they still don't quite sound like this.
Good day, sunshine.
See how they just disappear? To be honest, I didn't really notice that until yesterday either. And more on that outro. I love, as a listener, when attention is given to the so-called unimportant elements of the song. The ones that you're not going to spend so much time with. The introduction, the conclusion of the song, the outro. So it's special to me that they chose to do something different with this one in going up a key and then doing that canon thing that they actually did in the previous track, She Said, She Said.
She said, I know what it's like to be there. I know what it's like to be there.
And when I say canon, I mean, I think I've done this before, but this is a canon. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily life is but a dream. Merrily life is but a dream. Merrily life, Nah. That's enough of that. Sorry I had to do that to you, but it's the easiest way to explain a canon. They're doing it here, but to much greater effect.
Good day, sunshine.
Good day, sun. Good day, sunshine. See how each of them is taking the melody and then throwing it over there, and one of them picks it up and throws it over there? I need more light. All up, it's like a kind of ecstasy. Care to weigh in, Lenny?
That's the Beatles, always unpredictable and a bit more inventive than most.
Now let's consider the song in the context of the album that it's on. Now, when I had that cassette as a child, the tape needed to be flipped after Yellow Submarine, so for years I thought that She Said was the side B opener, not Good Day Sunshine, and it creates a decidedly different feel to the album. Yeah, for years I thought that side B opened with a real kick in the pants, like a strap in, here we go.
I said, no, 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 you're wrong, when I was a boy.
But I also really like this song as the opener to side B, because She Said has this heavy, distorted, sludgy feel.
She said.
And this one is its polar opposite. It's bright, it's clean, it's upbeat, it's peppy.
I'm in love and it's a sunny day.
It's a breath of fresh air. It's earnest. It's also the first piano song on the album. But so far as we've been listening, we've had snarling, amplified tracks, acoustic lethargy.
Float upstream.
We've had sitar. We have had strings. We've had bubbles being blown in a glass. This is an album that never lets you rest on your listener laurels. Every song is a plot twist, and this song is no exception. Another complaint that I saw on Reddit is that everything else in the song is so deep and meaningful and philosophical, but I wouldn't necessarily write off this song as an exception to that rule, because philosophically it's coming from the same place as Love You To. Live in the now. Be mindful of your present circumstances. Enjoy it with the people that you love, because one day you will be dead. I'm sorry if this is not the moment when you wanted a reminder of your own mortality. Many of the songs on this album tackle elements of the human condition. And this one does too. Sometimes it's just nice to be in this sun. Look what it's doing to me! Being in love, enjoying a sunny day, having a nap under a tree. Those are parts of the human condition. Just perhaps not the ones that Sartre or Camus were tackling specifically, you know? The Beatles don't need to be de Beauvoir on every song, you know? Sometimes it's nice to just be in love and have a picnic. Now, perhaps most importantly, I would like to look at this song and look at what was happening in the broader musical landscape at the time. Now, I believe that a lot of the complaints that I was coming across on Reddit stem from the fact that this song is being held up in comparison against a bunch of other songs on an album of powerhouses. So let's zoom out and see what Paul McCartney's peers were doing at the time. This song, Paul McCartney freely admitted, was inspired by Daydream by the Lovin' Spoonful. Lovin' Spoonful.
What a day for a daydream.
Good song. But there were lots of mid-60s good vibes songs that were floating around, like Sunny Afternoon. In the summertime. It's a Beautiful Morning by an act I can't remember, but editor Nancy will put here. And later, I Can See Clearly Now by Johnny Nash.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone.
Feelin' Groovy by Simon and Garfunkel.
Life, I love you, all is groovy.
And with the exception of that last, each of the others was an example of some of the best work of its writer. Good Day Sunshine, I would argue, is comparable to or better than each of those songs. And it's being dismissed as one of Paul McCartney's weakest efforts. The Beatles on a bad day still had the ability to blow everyone else out of the water. That's what he's doing here. One last bonus point. If you listen very closely, you can hear John respond to something Paul's saying here.
She feels good. She feels good.
And you can sort of hear Paul McCartney crack a smile in that next line.
She knows she's looking fine.
Just a little detail that I'm sure some of you will love. I did. As I said, this is a song that wears its influences on its sleeve, but it weaves in more complex musical ideas while delivering a jubilant, easy on the ears delight. A strength of Revolver as an album is its sense of balance. You never have too much heavy without a little light. Thematically, instrumentally, tonally, for every heavy, sludgy, distorted song, you have something like A Good Day Sunshine. It is, for me as a listener, one of the most important elements of Revolver. It is never too heavy, too noisy, too distorted, too bleak, or equally too cloying, too sweet, too trite, too earnest, too childlike. It always maintains a perfect balance. And this song plays a critical role in achieving that. This is a song that is fully deserving of its place on one of the greatest albums of all time. And that's all I'll hear about it, okay? That's it. I'm just kidding. You're welcome to argue with me in the comments. I read them. I read them all, every week. Sometimes my sister reads them and she sends me her favorites. A particular favorite from last week was the person who complimented the trumpet correspondent on the very good tone that she got on a first run. So thank you for that. That was well received by me and mine. So my question to you this week is, do you think that Good Day Sunshine deserves a space on this incredible album? Yay or nay? And why? Discuss! Let me know in the comments. Chapter 9. And Your Bird Can Sing. Before I forget, there will be an update about the paper mache yellow submarine at the end of the episode. Maybe I should make a paper mache yellow submarine. But I want to start talking about the music first. Today we're listening to a song that John Lennon described as, and I quote, "one of my throwaways, fancy paper around an empty box." Critics and I would beg to differ. AllMusic's Thomas Ward called it one of the finest on Revolver. Rolling Stone's Rob Sheffield called it one of his, presumably John's, best songs ever. Phil Collins of boom 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 fame said it's one of the best songs ever written and it's only a minute and a half long. This is the song. So clearly we all know what a poor judge of his own songs John Lennon is, because this song's great. Nobody really knows what the song is about because John Lennon never elaborated, and given his empty box comment, it's clear that he didn't think it was very important. But theories abound. Some people think it's about Paul McCartney, others think it's about Mick Jagger, his bird who can sing being Marianne Faithfull, but that's debunked because they didn't get together until later in 1966, well after this album had come out. My favorite theory is that it's about Frank Sinatra, and his bird, which allegedly is what he called his...
What do you see when you turn on the light?
Allegedly. I don't want the mob coming after me. If you think that you know what the song is about, let me know in the comments. But ultimately, I'm not going to spend too much more time speculating about the so-called throwaway lyrical content of the song, because what you find if you look behind the lyrics is a truly incredible piece of music. The song not only shows us a four-part machine, well-oiled and running flawlessly, it also shows us a collective of four musicians who are evolving faster than they ever have. Indeed, they may be evolving faster than any band, any musician ever has. Ever. It's not necessarily my favorite song on the album, although I love every song on this album, so don't misunderstand me there. I do love this song. One of the things I love most about this song, though, is that in it I think you can draw a direct line from their humblest beginnings through to their future output. This song is a story about the past, present, and future of this band. That may sound like a lofty claim, but bear with, I'm going to do my best to back that up with substance. Mainly so that I don't end up raving without direction for the next 20 minutes. I would first like to look at the use of musical motifs in the song, and then I would like to track the song's development from its inception through to this wondrous, polished, finished product that we can enjoy with our ear holes today. Whew. Let's start already. An English academic named Toby Litt said that if you slowed the song down, it would sound like a Bach chorale. I'm not sure if I would go so far as to say that, but I will concede that there are a lot of elements of this song that harken back to classical music traditions. Maybe unintentionally, although Paul was listening to a lot of classical music at the time, so who knows. I'll show you what I mean. This may not be your favorite thing to do, but it is critical to my argument, so let's have a listen to Mozart's Sonata number 16 in C major. It sounds like this. In this piece, there's a little arpeggiated run that closes off one section. It sounds like this. But that's not the last you hear of it. It's also brought back later in the song, but in a minor key, like this. And then it's revisited throughout the song as it moves through different keys. Here's another one. At the beginning of the song, we hear a number of scales being played to great musical effect, like this. It's brought back in the next section, but slightly altered, like this. And then later again in the piece. In essence, what's happening here is that the composer has landed on a musical idea that really tickles his fancy. And so he's weaving it in and out through the song so that it becomes sort of self-referential. Each time it comes around, as the listener, you can go, oh, I recognize that from this part. When it's done well, it's quite clever, and I think that's what the Beatles are doing on And Your Bird Can Sing with that guitar riff. Guitar correspondent, please? Now, this is, of course, the riff in question. It's played by George and Paul. This is the lower part. And this is the higher part. But that's the riff in its entirety. It's actually used in a variety of ways throughout the song. It's first teased in the song's very brief introduction, Anchor if you don't mind. That's only the first half of it. At the end of the first verse, we get another little taste. It's brought back in an entirely different iteration during the bridge.
When your prized possessions start to weigh you down.
Until finally the whole thing is unfurled in its full glory. stutters to a close at the end of the song. Leaving us feeling slightly unresolved. Maybe because we don't know what the song's about. Stop trying to eat the microphone. Yeah, I love you too. Truly, this riff, I think, is the backbone of the song. It's beautifully interwoven, it's incredibly melodic, it's well executed. This harmonized guitar thing became quite a trend in the early to mid-70s, and I do have to wonder whether this wasn't the inspiration for Thin Lizzy. Boston. The Allman Brothers. The Eagles. In the case of the Eagles, probably because Joe Walsh, a guitarist of the Eagles, was at a party years later, and he told Ringo Starr, who oddly enough was his brother-in-law, that as a child he had spent weeks working on playing this riff, and he thought that George Harrison was some sort of guitar genius for being able to play that, only to have Ringo say, actually it's George and Paul playing together, it's not one guitarist, it's two. So maybe that's where they got the idea for this. In any case, this harmonized guitar part is one of those musical motifs. It's an idea, a theme that is being toyed with, that's being introduced at this part, twisted and morphed and turned into something else that they use in this part, and something else that's used here. It is a tool to help tell the song's story, which I think is really cool. Speaking of harmony, let's use this as an excuse to digress and fangirl about the harmonies on this song a little bit. So much for my tidy outline. In several Beatles songs, their fantastic three-part vocal blend is used as the main feature of the song. You can hear it in songs like This Boy.
This boy wants you back again.
Yes It Is.
Yes, it is, it's true.
Nowhere Man.
He's a real nowhere man.
If I Needed Someone.
If I needed someone.
That's not what they're doing with this song. They're using it as an accent more than as a feature. It adds these little pops of brightness to lift the verses, like this. One voice. Boom! 3 voices! One voice. Boom! 3! Why do they sound that good when they sing together? Is it because John and George have that slightly nasal tone to their voices and that blends them really well with Paul's slightly throatier, slightly breathier tone? Is it because their 3 harmonies work really well with their ranges, with Paul singing usually on top and John and George swapping around the middle parts? I don't know why it is, but suffice to say, when those 3 voices come together, their individual attributes kind of fall away and make room for this new 4th thing, a sound entirely unto itself, unlike any of the individual 3 parts it's comprised of. Spectacular! A+, Beatles! There's one other pattern that I'd like to highlight on this song, and that is descending melody lines. We first hear it in the riff. It's a little bit lower each time. In that bridge part, the same thing happens with the riff. The top note descends like this. Meanwhile, the bass is highlighting those descending top notes with its own riff. We'll have the bass correspondent show you. And while we're on the bass, its melody is also descending at the ends of the verses. Perhaps the most obvious example, these beautiful backing vocals in the final verse. The harmonies have moved up, and those top 2 are cascading downwards like this. This is the highest one. Tell me that you heard every sound there is. And then the next one down is doing this. Tell me that you heard every sound there is. The bass bass is right there underneath it, highlighting that same descent. I don't think that's an arrangement accident. I think that that is an arrangement decision. To take one idea and then pepper it throughout the song in different orientations in different ways. It is such clever arranging, it is such clever songwriting. It demonstrates their increasing maturity and skill as composers, as songwriters. And what's even cooler is that we can see this process unfolding if we listen to the track through the different stages in its production. So let's do that. This is what the earliest recorded version of this song sounds like.
Tell me that you got everything you want, and your bed can sing.
It's got that 12-string Rickenbacker. So it's got what is by 1966 a very birdsy sound. It's a moderate tempo, some fantastic bass work by Paul McCartney. I especially like this moment. And they've maintained a two-part harmony throughout the verse.
You say you've seen 7 wonders.
The problem here is that I think largely because of that Rickenbacker, this track sounds like something that's already been done not only by the Beatles themselves, but by other bands. So they move on to this version.
You tell me that you've got everything you want, and your bed can sing.
It's a lot more rock and roll. That second harmony in the verse has dropped away.
You say you've seen 7 wonders.
They've distorted the guitars. Yes, good choice. And Paul's playing a much more traditional rock and roll bass line. Side note, how skillful a bassist is Paul McCartney that he can produce 3 astounding bass lines for the same song? Incredible. They've tidied up the riff a little bit. It's a lot cleaner. They've introduced some new parts at the middle 8.
When your prized possessions.
Backing vocals are a lot tighter, they're a lot more clipped and clean.
And your bed can swing, and your bed can sing.
But they do employ the same backing vocals that they used on If I Needed Someone. So they move on to this version. Our final version. They've sped it up.
You tell me that you've got everything you want, and your bed can swing, but you can't hear me.
Band sounds really tight. This might sound very nitpicky, but it's these little details that make the Beatles sound as tight as they do. They have perfectly aligned the way that they open and close the phrases that they're singing together. Nobody is coming in a little bit late or a little bit early. Nobody's holding on to a note longer than anybody else. They are all doing exactly the same thing.
And your bed can sing.
I'll point this out and you'll never be able to unhear it. In some recordings, when singers sing together, they don't align their S sounds. And if the letter S isn't perfectly synchronized, it will go s. And again, it sounds super nitpicky, but you don't get to sound like this without practicing those things, without eliminating those little things that make you sound a little bit less tight as a band. So instead of hearing, and your bird can sing, their 3 voices sound like one instrument. They've taken that riff that we thoroughly dissected earlier in the episode, and they've given it distinct parts for the introduction, for the ends of the phrases of the verses, for the bridge, for the outro. So they're consolidating these motifs and they're putting them to use in their song. Their groove is consistent. Those 2 guitar parts that are harmonizing are locked in. Much like the vocals, it sounds like a single instrument, as Joe Walsh mistakenly thought, because the beginnings and ends of the phrases perfectly line up. This is the kind of telepathy that a band can only achieve if they put in their 10,000 hours to playing together. This is where Hamburg pays off. This is where years of grueling tours pay off. Their shared history as a group underscores every single moment in this song. It's polished, it's professional, and when you listen to these three versions together, you can hear a group of musicians who are rejecting what has already been done. They are stretching themselves to do better than the last and to expand the bounds of their own creativity. It's a display of their growing maturity, and it predicts the music to come. The Beatles are exploring musical concepts on this song to a greater extent than they ever have before, and in a matter of months they'll extend that line of thinking to an album as a whole, which is arguably the first concept album in rock history. And that's why, to me, this could be the Beatles at their peak. They're experienced, but they are exploding with creativity and with a drive to innovate. So you see, And Your Bird Can Sing. It's a map of the Beatles' past, their present, and their future. Ta-da! It's also a damn good song. And maybe more than that, they're also still having a good time. To me, there is no better example of that than the outtakes of this track. They're somewhere in the middle of the second take of this song, and John and Paul are hit with an attack of the giggles.
You tell me that you've got the thing you want. You can't see me. That was it, wasn't it?
And to me, that is just a delight to listen to. They're still friends, and they're just having the best time. That's almost it for me. Before we go, I finished the submarine! Here it is!
It's done.
Thanks again to those of you who made donations in order to get me to make this damn thing. I had a great time making it. Chapter 10. For No One. Oh, you're here already? I haven't barely even started. That big of a Beatles fan, are we? We've covered the first two tracks on side B, so the song that we're going to be listening to today is, in the words of Elvis Costello, about as perfect a record as you could make. And it sounds like this. Ugh. Buddy.
Your day breaks, your mind aches.
Now, I will admit, the title of today's video was a tad hyperbolic. Perhaps a more appropriate title would be something like, That Time That Beatle Paul and his sidekick George Martin traveled back in time and made significant advances in the development of Baroque pop as a music genre. But there is a character limit on titles, so we do what we have to, right? Before we get really stuck in, I'd like to offer a disclaimer for this episode. We are going to be wading into the realm of classical music, and when I have done this in previous episodes, the music theory purists have gotten their knickers in a right tangle and taken to the comment section because I've used the word write instead of compose, or song instead of piece, or bridge instead of middle eight. But the fact is, I am not in the habit of arguing with pedants, because I feel like that detracts from the joy of music, which is what I am here to proselytize. So let's do that. My aim here is to answer 4 questions today. 1, what is Baroque music? 2, what is Baroque pop music? 3, what does this have to do with the Beatles? And 4, what does this have to do with today's song in particular? And then I'd like to pontificate a little bit about the lyrics, because this song has some of the most heartbreaking lyrics, I think, of any Beatles song. Let's begin! Question 1, what is Baroque music? Well, it was the dominant form of Western music between a period of about 1600 to 1750, which was the year that one of its foremost composers, Bach, died. So I suppose in an alternate reading you could say that Bach was the single thing that was holding back the development of Western music. Seriously though, don't come for me, music theorists. I'm sorry. It's just a little harmless fun. It was important for a number of reasons. For example, it sort of consolidated the idea of writing music in a major or a minor key. Prior to this point, music was being written in modes as opposed to major and minor keys. You'll find that we are actually still using this system in modern music, except for Miles Davis. But that man follows no one's rules. Baroque music essentially invented the bass line. Again, prior to this point in music, pieces didn't really have a bass line. So really, again, we can trace today's bass lines back to Baroque music. Also, it developed the idea of the orchestra, basically taking a bunch of different instruments with different unique voices, grouping them together, but having them do different things, serve different purposes within that group, creating like a family of different sounds. And that really expanded the possibilities of what you could do in composing a piece of music. Again, still in use today. Among many other things, Baroque music is defined by elements like counterpoint, which is when you have different melody lines artfully intertwining, weaving in and out within a piece of music. For example, if you listen to the following piece, you'll be able to hear that there are two distinct voices and they are interacting with each other but doing different things. Another major feature in Baroque music is scalic melodies. Don't panic, it's actually very simple. It just means that the melodies of the pieces are based around a scale. A major scale, a minor scale, etc. We'll come back to this later when we get to talking about this song. Yes. For the purposes of today's episode, that is enough of an overview. But if you're new to Baroque music and you want to learn more about it, I cannot recommend enough that you don't read up on it, because it's simultaneously very vague and overwhelmingly dry. Instead, I think you should listen to the music of Bach, because it is arguably the genesis of modern popular music. And with that, I invite the purists to enter the comment section now and argue with me or each other. I think I'll be entertained either way. Question 2. What is Baroque pop? This is a bit more in my wheelhouse. It's a genre that essentially fuses elements of classical music with elements of popular music. Boom. Fused. I didn't want to say that Paul McCartney or the Beatles invented Baroque pop, because there were precursors to what the Beatles were doing with the genre. For example, Phil Spector was using really ornate orchestral arrangements in his music in the early 60s, like You've Lost That Love and Feeling.
For you.
And then you've got the Beach Boys, who I would say, alongside the Beatles, were central to this subgenre of popular music. Indeed, I would say that Pet Sounds is almost like a Baroque pop concept album. For instance, if you ever listen to a song like When I Grow Up to Be a Man, there is harpsichord in it.
Yeah.
Harpsichord, of course, being an instrument that was very commonly used in Baroque music. And in fact, musicians in the 60s just took the harpsichord and went nuts with it. Here's a montage of musicians going nuts with harpsichords in the mid-60s.
For your love. Just walk away, Renee. Everybody's hustling just to tell her to make me a kind of rich. Monday, it's been a long time since I last set eyes on the church.
That last track by the Kinks also has this very Baroque trill right about here in the track. I would make the argument that this branching out of popular music into less traditional forms, well, less traditional for rock music, more traditional for Western music as a whole, was part of the psychedelic movement, that drive to create and discover new sounds and incorporate them into rock music. But what does this have to do with the Beatles? This is an episode about the Beatles, right? Yes, it is. The Beatles were hugely influential in the development of Baroque pop as a genre. And here I have to mention an unsung hero of the Beatles constellation. and that is George Martin. I know that people know who he is and recognize the work that he did for the Beatles, but I still feel like he's underrated. I still feel like he deserves more attention and more credit, because it was George Martin in 1965 who suggested to Paul McCartney that he have strings on the track Yesterday. And at the time, Paul McCartney was really reluctant. He said to George, and I quote, "I don't want Mantovani." To the uninitiated, this is what Mantovani sounds like. So George Martin proposed a string quartet because it would be a little bit more modest and maybe understated by comparison against a full orchestra.
Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be.
They had never played a track where only one of them was on it, and there was no conventional rock instrumentation. There was an acoustic guitar, but apart from that, everything else was a string quartet. Unprecedented! Who would have thought the Beatles would do something unprecedented? They're so predictable, usually. Later in 1965, on Rubber Soul, George Martin contributed this solo in the song In My Life. There's more on this in the episode I did on In My Life, but essentially what happened is that John Lennon had written the entire song except for this one bit, and he wasn't sure what to put there, so he said to George Martin, put something Baroque sounding in it. And George Martin wrote a piece that was composed, whatever, a piece that was inspired by Bach, but he couldn't actually play it at the speed of the recording. So he played it slower and then sped up the tape to match the speed of the rest of the song. And that ended up making the piano sound a little bit like a harpsichord. So essentially there are a couple of songs, When I Grew Up to Be a Man being one of them, that preceded In My Life. But following that point, there were harpsichords everywhere. And I would put a lot of that down to the sound that George Martin had achieved on In My Life. Of course, that's not necessarily provable. That's just my take. I'm just a person on the internet with a camera, and too much to say about the Beatles. Indeed, some might argue that I'm doing this because my friends and family got sick of hearing about it. In any case, that solo that George Martin contributed to In My Life gives the song a very old-timey feel, which is perfect because it's about nostalgia. Well done, George Martin. In the first 3 months of 1966, the Beatles had their little sabbatical where they weren't on tour, they didn't need to be in the studio, they weren't filming anything, and they all went their separate ways and got to develop a little bit as individuals. Paul chose to spend that time consuming classical music, so when they got back in the studio in the spring of that year, he was primed and ready to go on this classical stuff in a way that he hadn't been a year earlier. He was ready to try new things, and he was ready to apply some of the interesting sounds that he had been soaking up in the first 3 months of the year. George Martin was there in the wings, ready to provide the technical know-how to translate that vision into Beatles music. And that's how we ended up with masterpieces like Eleanor Rigby,
Father Mackenzie, wiping the dirt from his hands as he walks from the grave.
and For No One. But question 4, and at this point I don't remember the exact wording I used at the beginning of the video, but basically what does Baroque music have to do with the song For No One? Well, I'm gonna tell you right now. First off, the instrumentation. On this song, Paul McCartney plays not only a piano, but also a clavichord. What is a clavichord, you ask? An excellent question, and to answer that, we're going to go now to our field correspondent. Thank you very much, Anchor. Hello, Internet. I would like to introduce to you my friend Paul, who is not only a colleague of mine, but also one of my favorite people on the planet, and I feel very fortunate that our timelines have overlapped. Say hello, Paul.
Hi there.
Tell the internet, what is it that you do for work?
Yeah, basically I build and restore historic keyboard instruments. So harpsichords, early pianos, and clavichords. That is basically what I do.
Basically what
So
you
building new instruments and also restoring old ones.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
And making all the components that go with them.
Sorry, we didn't quite catch that.
Oh. and making all the components that go with them.
And what do we have behind us today?
So this is just a little clavichord. It's here for repairs, and probably made in the 1960s. Yeah, what more can one say? I mean, it's a little mass-produced clavichord from the 60s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain how it works?
Right. Okay. This is probably the simplest and arguably the most expressive keyboard instrument there is.
Okay.
Dating back to the sort of 1400s. it's also the oldest keyboard instrument.
Right. I didn't know that.
So, and the action is simplicity itself. The key is like a seesaw. On the end, it has a brass part called a tangent, so called because it touches the string from tango, tangere, tediki, tactum in Latin, to touch.
Wow, we're learning so much today.
So, you depress the key, the tangent hits the string, and the string starts vibrating between the tangent and the bridge on the soundboard.
Right.
And
So it effectively creates a bridge at the other end of the
it
string.
does. The tangent is the other bridge.
Right.
But because that's also the point at which the string is caused to vibrate, it can only produce a very small amount of volume because there's very little string excursion at that point. So that's a sort of typical volume.
In order to record this on the Beatles track, they'd have had to
Closely
mic
mic'd.
it very, very closely.
They would have done.
The clavichord track on the song has a very tinny, trebly tone to it.
They can sort of sound a bit like a sort of bee in a bottle.
Right. Yes, yeah, it's
You know,
sort
that
of
sort
buzzy.
of buzzy sound.
Yes. And
And-
for years I thought it was a harpsichord on the
Right.
recording. I only just learned that it was a clavichord.
Yeah.
Actually, on Friday when I texted you
I'm
and asked if you
amazed.
had
Well,
one.
yeah, I had no idea they used them.
Yeah, harpsichords had a huge heyday in the 1960s. Do you know the song
Okay.
Monday Monday?
Yes.
Yeah, that's got a harpsichord
Oh,
on
really?
it.
It's so long since I've heard it. I must have a listen again.
Okay, I can facilitate that.
I'm sure you can. Yeah, yeah.
So unlike a piano which has a quite complicated action,
Mhm.
a series of different mechanisms to get the hammer to strike the string to
Yep.
produce sound, this
Mhm.
is basically
This
the
has-
opposite. It's just
Basically,
a
it has
seesaw.
no actions, just the key
Right.
with the tangent on the end. And sounds as long as the key is held down. So you can do that with it too. You can get that.
A bit of vibrato.
Well, yeah, exactly, which the Germans call Bebung, which
That's
is
a great name.
yeah, exactly, which is sort of quaking. Sort of.
Okay. That's so
So
cool.
you can do quite interesting things with it. It's superior to the piano and the harpsichord in that respect.
Right.
That you've got complete control over what you do with the string. Pianos
Very
do
cool.
pretty well when when they're properly regulated.
Yeah. No, they do okay.
Yeah,
but
yeah, they do.
They've got nothing on clavichords.
No, no, no.
Right.
Couldn't exactly do a big concert or public concert with one of these.
No.
It just simply wouldn't be heard. But composers like Mozart and those people, their idea was that once you can play everything with all the expression that you want on the clavichord, the rest is easy because they are quite demanding to play.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Simplicity in its mechanism, but
yeah.
extremely complicated
That's
to
right.
master. I find that they can be quite tricky to tune because
Mhm.
it's so easy to bend the
That's right.
the string
So-
sharp. Yes. So would you say they fell out of favour at some point?
They were used right into the early 19th century. And
Into
people
the
like
20th,
Mozart.
if the Beatles or anyone
Well, yeah,
to go by.
that's true.
If you don't mind, we'll have a listen to the song and you can tell me what you think.
Oh yeah, sure.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so as far as you know, you've never heard this
As far
song.
as I know, I've never heard it. Yes.
Great.
I have no recollection of having heard it.
Okay.
Put it that way.
It sounds like this. That's the song.
Very good.
Did you enjoy it?
I did.
You did?
It's very good.
Great.
I was listening for the clavichord, but it's in there somewhere.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. It's very nicely mixed in with the piano, so it sounds like the piano has that buzzy
Like
sort of
an
trebly
extra.
sound to
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
which I think is why I thought it was a harpsichord.
Yes.
It's got a little bit more body and volume
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the song that this week's episode is about.
Nice one.
I think
Clever.
that's everything I need from you.
For now.
Yes, for now, for now, for today.
Yeah.
I'll be in touch.
Okay. Good.
Back to you.
Yeah.
The rhythm section is very understated. The bass is quite quiet in the mix, and the drums start out barely even there. Right at the top of the song, you've got sort of like a heartbeat of a kick drum.
Your day breaks, your mind aches. You find
Cocoon. Cocoon. Like Patrick Swayze in Dirty Dancing.
It's a feeling, a heartbeat. Cocoon.
Cocoon. One of my favorite things about the song is that percussion does build throughout the song so that it becomes increasingly like agonized and desperate. So the tambourine comes in somewhere around the middle of the song.
She says that long ago she knew some.
By the end, we've got quite a lot more of Ringo. Here.
There were times when
Okay, that last verse feels a lot fuller. I'm digressing from my main point. Let's return to it now. This track also has a bit of brass on it. Here. The Storytime correspondent will tell us more about this now. Good day to you. We will be taking today's reading from Here, There, and Everywhere by Jeff Emmerich. A controversial figure in the Beatles community, but he does have some interesting tales to spin, so. Another memorable incident occurred when Alan Civil, formerly of the London Philharmonic, and then the principal horn player of the BBC's Symphony Orchestra, was brought in to add French horn to Paul's haunting song, For No One. Alan was under a lot of pressure doing that overdub because it was so hard to hit the high note in the solo. In fact, most people would have never written that part for a French horn player because it was too high to play. But that was the note Paul wanted to hear, and so that was the note he was going to get. We felt that Alan, being the best horn player in London, could actually hit it, even though most horn players couldn't. Alan was reluctant to Alan was reluctant to even try it. He was actually breaking into a sweat, telling everyone it really shouldn't be done. But eventually he gave it a go and pulled it off. Though Alan was a wreck by the time he left that session, he was well pleased with what he'd done because it was the performance of his life. That was the high note there. Next, I think there are a number of Baroque compositional elements of the song as well. You'll remember the thing I said about scalic melodies, I hope, at the beginning of the episode. Scalic melodies. It just means that the melodies of the pieces are based around a scale. And that is something that this song uses. Piano correspondent? Hello! Good to see you again. Now if you take the verse of this song, you notice that the bass is playing a scale. This is an example of the kind of descending scale melody you might find in a piece of Baroque music. An excellent example, which is basically the same as this, is Air on a G string. This descending scale melody is actually very common in popular music now. For example, the oh-so-popular song from the 1960s, Whiter Shade of Pale, by Procol Harum, was influenced by Air on a G string. If you listen to them together, they sound very similar.
We skip the light fandango. Turns cartwheels across the floor. I was feeling kind of seasick.
And it's exactly the same chord sequence as Paul McCartney is using in For No One. For No One goes, your day breaks, your mind aches, you find that all are words of kindness. Whiter Shade of Pale goes, we skip the light fandango, turning cartwheels across the floor. And there are tons of songs that have this chord sequence. Here are just a few. Have you ever seen the rain coming down on a sunny day? Turn and face the strange changes. Don't wanna be a richer man. Changes. Yes, I've been broken hearted. Blue since the day we parted. Why did I ever let you go? I'll light the fire. You'll place the flowers in the vase that you bought today. Telling that it's human nature. Why? Sing us a song, you're the piano man. Sing us a song tonight. The Beatles themselves have even used it multiple times. In Penny Lane, there is a barber showing photographs of every head. Hello, hello. I don't know why you say goodbye. I say your day breaks, your mind aches. and so on. We've been listening to this for like 400 or 500 years, and it's still fresh. I still enjoy that chord sequence. And obviously you do too, because you're here and you would otherwise probably not be very interested in this episode. There's also the concept of contrary motion, which is when you've got one of the melodic voices ascending a scale, and at the same time that the other is descending a scale. Or the other way around, where they go this way. So this way, or this way. Either way, they're moving contrary to each other. And there's some of that in this song. And in her eyes you see nothing. No sign of love behind her tears. Cry for no one. A love that should have lasted years. And the last thing that I can identify is the use of counterpoint. Which, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, is when you've got distinct melodic voices that are weaving in and out of each other. And obviously there's some of that in what the piano correspondent just showed us. It also occurs in this song when they bring the French horn back in at the end, because then you've got the melody of the horn weaving in with Paul McCartney's vocal melody. Isn't that lovely? They complement each other in this very artful way. So that is, in essence, everything that I have to say about the music, but that's not all that there is to this song, because this song's lyrics are brilliant. Truly some of Paul McCartney's best work, I think. It is so profoundly sad. It was written after he had a fight with his then-girlfriend, Jane Asher. I was not there, but from what I can tell, the central conflict of their relationship seemed to be that she wanted to be more independent and to have a career as a stage actress, whereas he wanted her to stay at home and take on a more traditional role as his girlfriend. I'm Team Jane on this one. And so the gist of the song is that there is an unrequited love within an established relationship. It reminds me of a song called All of a Sudden by XTC. And also of The Dangling Conversation by Simon and Garfunkel.
And I only kiss your shadow, I cannot feel your hand. You're a stranger now unto me.
In which the singer realizes that what had previously been a companionable silence in his relationship with his partner had gradually become just silence, and there was nothing left. And it had happened in a way that he hadn't realized. Like that, this is a song about growing up and growing apart, and suddenly finding that your partner doesn't love you the way that they used to. In that way, I think that this song is so much sadder than one about an explosive end to a relationship. It's like something disappeared and it was just totally outside of your control. The lyrics of this song just run the gamut of all of the feelings that might be involved in that, like resentment, which you can hear in this line.
A love that should have lasted years.
That should have lasted years. Did not. Or this one here.
You stay home, she goes out.
You stay home, she goes out. Knowing the context of their relationship, that he wanted her to be the one who stayed at home while he went out, there's this sort of undercurrent of resentment. She should be here with me, and she's going off doing whatever she wants. There's disbelief.
You want her, you need her, and yet you don't believe her when she says her love is dead. You think she needs you.
Maybe instead of disbelief, it's willful ignorance. It's all within the same family. You've got the grief of searching for anything in your partner's eyes and instead finding
no sign of love behind the tears.
No sign of love. Nothing there. Nothing left. And then there's that haunting nostalgia of what the relationship had been at some point.
You find that all her words of kindness linger on when she no longer needs you.
You can also hear it in this line.
There will be times when all the things she said will fill your head. You won't forget her.
And in that last line of that last verse, you won't forget her, there is acceptance. He accepts that it's all over. Of course it wasn't. They stayed together for a couple of years after this. I think she even went to India with him. So maybe he was just being a melodramatic baby. Whatever the case, I think it's one of Paul McCartney's most beautiful compositions, or songs, or pieces of music, whatever you might want to call it. It's stunning. Chapter 11, Dr. Robert. We're about halfway through side 2, which means that today's track sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Being my friend, I said you go Dr. Robert.
This is a song that was written by John Lennon. Paul recalls that it was co-written by Paul McCartney. John concedes that Paul maybe wrote the bridge of this song. Well, well, well. It is a song that is overtly about drugs, whereas I think a lot of the others are covertly about drugs. After they finished recording this song, John played an acetate of it to his longtime friend and ex-quarryman Pete Shotton. And in Pete Shotton's words, I quote, "He seemed beside himself with glee over the prospect of millions of record buyers innocently singing along. Debauchery." As with Andrew Bird Can Sing, theories abound as to who Dr. Robert is. People have assumed that maybe Dr. Robert is somebody who introduced the Beatles to drugs, like Dr. Robert Zimmerman, otherwise known as Bob Dylan, who introduced them to weed, or Dr. John Riley, the dentist who spiked George and John's coffee with acid after they had dinner with him. That's a no-no. You don't give people drugs without their consent. By the way. Just putting it out there. Others think it might be Dr. Robert MacPhail, a character from Aldous Huxley's book Island. I think I've read that. I think I liked it. Or maybe Robert Fraser, a gallery owner in London who moonlighted as a drug dealer to London's most famous. Even John Lennon muddies the waters by saying, and I quote, "It was about myself. I was the one that carried all the pills on tour." However, one Paul McCartney in 1967 said, "Coming to you live from a car, we'll be taking today's reading from The Good Book. Dr. Robert is like a joke. In the States, we'd hear people say, you can get everything you want off him, any pills you want. It was a big racket, but a joke too, about this fellow who cured everyone of everything with all these pills and tranquilizers, injections for this and that. He just kept New York high. That's what Dr. Robert is about. Just a pill doctor who sees you all right." Which means it is probably Dr. Robert Freeman, who is a New York City physician, who would administer to his well-to-do patients these shots of vitamin B12 laced with just a pinch of speed. It was one of the first tracks that was recorded for Revolver, which I think makes sense because it's also maybe one of the most straightforward tracks on the album. It's something that maybe would have fit on Rubber Soul. There again, the first song that they recorded for this album was Tomorrow Never Knows.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream.
So there goes that theory. I love this song, but that's not a view that's necessarily held by a lot of Beatles fans who argue that this is one of Revolver's lower tier tracks. My goal today is to prove that this song is deserving of more than just a cursory listen, or worse, a skip. But I'm not going to do it alone. Today, I have a special guest. Final Friday fam, please welcome my sister, Anna! Okay, so do you know what we're gonna do here today?
I think I have a rough idea. I think it's a competition of sorts.
Yeah, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a listen to the song, and each of us is gonna list as many reasons as we can think of that this song is special and deserving of love and attention. And then we're going to share them one at a time. We're gonna swap off.
Okay.
The person with the most reasons at the end wins.
Okay.
And if either of us says a reason that the other person has, neither of us gets the point.
Okay.
Okay?
That sounds reasonable. It seems well thought through.
Great.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Can I borrow some paper?
No.
I have to remember my idea.
Yeah, you've got to store them in your brain. Duh. Yes, of course. All right. Let's go. Are you ready? I know what you were going to say.
I can't say that word on YouTube. You get.
Are you ready for the sex, girls?
I think you get demonetized if you say that.
I'm never monetized anyway because I play the music.
Oh, that's true.
Who cares about money, right? The best things in life are free. You can keep them for the birds and bees. I need money.
What I want.
You
How
won.
many songs do you think we're gonna get through before we actually finish filming? Oh wait, we've started?
Go. Okay, should we paper, rock, scissors for who goes first?
Sure.
Damn. Okay.
These are really not.
You don't know what I have yet, so don't judge yours.
Okay. First thing is that the guitar has a cool tone.
Oh, I
kind of
have that.
twangy. Oh,
Let's talk about it some more though. It doesn't
Okay.
matter that neither of us gets the point. They put the guitar through automatic double tracking so that it's doubled, and then they put that through the Leslie speaker, which is what makes it go wow, 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 wow.
also in I Need You.
I need you.
No, that's a volume pedal.
That's a volume pedal.
But it is what they do all through the back half of Abbey Road.
Ah.
Like, you know the tone that you get on One Sweet Dream Came True. Dun, 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 dun. That's Leslie speaker.
Good for you, Leslie.
Good of Leslie to lend them her speaker. Life could be ecstasy, you and me and Leslie. But yes, I like that as well. I like that it's a little bit grungy.
Yeah. Bit twangy.
Let's listen to that bit there. That's a good bit with
That's
the
a good
guitar.
Yeah.
That's one thing I keep singing in the singing. The one thing that I keep...
Please, can you sing some of your comments?
Maybe at the end of the video. That's one thing that I keep seeing in the comments to these Revolver series videos, is that people really love George Harrison's guitar tone and feel like he never really matched this. Maybe I should do a video on my favorite George
Yes.
Harrison guitar tone. Okay. Watch the space.
I also was going to say that the riff is pretty fun too.
You don't get to sneak in a second one. I haven't even told you my first.
Okay. Yeah, it's good.
I like it as well. It's kind of like bright and cold, but also warm and fuzzy at the same time.
That sounds to me like such a mid-60s tone. Like it feels really fresh and modern and very different to what they're doing in the beginning of the 60s.
You know who were pioneers of guitar tone?
Les Paul and Mary
Yes.
Stewart. Not Mary
Ford.
Stewart, Mary Ford.
Yes. But also the Kinks.
Ooh.
You Really Got Me came out in like
Yeah.
1964. While the Beatles were still doing like way more clean toned things.
Interesting.
Good. Well, we got a lot of discussion out of
Okay.
that first point.
Lovely. Your turn.
The bouncy bass.
Ow.
The song has such a great bass line.
I have that
And,
later
like,
on.
Ah, damn. Okay. It's so, as you said, forward in the mix, but listen to how it bounces. But no, it's not that. It's that he's playing it a little bit staccato, so instead of doom, 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 he's playing doom, ba doom, 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 ba boom, boom, boom. It makes the song bounce. Maybe we'll get the bass correspondent to demonstrate. Hi there. This is what it would sound like if it weren't bouncing. And this is what it does sound like. Do I get a point for how it bounces?
I think so, because it's slightly different to
Yes.
what I was gonna say. My
Okay.
second point is that riff is really earwormy.
Which
And
one? The bass?
No, the guitar.
Doom dee doo dee doo. Okay, yeah.
And it carries throughout the entire song. Do I get a point for earwormy riff?
Yes. Okay, there's a key change in the middle of the verse. We start off here.
Be my friend, I said you called Dr. Roberts.
1, 2, 3.
Bum, 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 bum. Every major key has a family of chords that fits within its scale. So let's take C major for an example. If this is C major, the chord family that sits within C major are as follows. You can arrange them whatever way you want, but usually they work. So you could go like, or whatever. They work. And that's kind of a rule in music. However, music has rules in the same way that the English language has rules. They're more of a guideline, a suggestion. So in this song, which is in the key of A major, it goes down to... Now using that family of chords, it should be minor. It should go, you're a new and better man. He helps you to understand. Which is horrible. It goes to major. And because it's kind of incongruous and not what you would expect, it makes the song a little bit more exciting. There are a number of things in the song that take you by surprise. I think that's what I love about it, and what makes it more of a Revolver song than a Rubber Soul song. Rubber Soul songs have a similar vibe to this one, maybe, but you can
Revolver.
usually hear the direction that they're going to go in, whereas with Revolver, it feels like every song there is something that comes out of left field.
Nice.
Do you have that point?
I don't have that point.
Oh yeah, 2 points to me. Your turn.
Okay, my next point is that I really enjoy the feeling that the lyrics don't fit cleanly into the pocket.
Oh, they kind of like tumble over themselves?
Especially the line about, well, I've written day and night.
Day and night, he'll be there anytime at all, Dr. Robert.
There's an extra
It's
at
very-
all. Like,
it's very-
they don't need that, and it's great, and it keeps you.
It's very-
tumbly.
Yeah, it's very Bobbert Dylan.
Bobbert. Yeah.
What Bob stands for, right? Bobbert.
Is Robert short for Bobbert? Yeah, I think I'm also a bit biased because I'm a fan of John's kind of lazy nasal singing. Nasal singing.
Nazy. I think nazy works
this
better than
nazy-
nasal. Nasal sounds like a kind of treatment that Dr. Robert might give you.
They're great for the 11s. I like the idea that Dr. Robert is an esthetician.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it works really well with the bouncy bass that Nancy mentioned just before, and kind of tumbles over itself in this very kind of laid back, fun, casual way. Do I get a point?
Yeah, you get a point.
Wow.
My turn?
Yes.
The way that John Lennon swoops his vocals. Here. It's so lazy. He helps you to understand. It's so lazy. Feels like you're on a roller coaster. Which is probably what Dr. Robert's B12 plus amphetamine shots feel like. Woo! Ah!
That's wild.
Do I get a point for that?
Yes.
Yes!
The day and night line reminds me a little bit of Tallahassee Bridge.
Tallahatchie?
Tallahatchie.
To Billy Joe.
That's the
By
one.
Bobby Gentry.
Yeah, that one has a similar squeezing too many words into the space of the lyric.
Wasn't I talking to him after church last Sunday night?
Anyway, that is a similar vibe.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah,
Cool.
you can have that point.
My next point is that maybe a tom that's getting whacked.
Where? That's a snare.
That's a snare? Okay, something's getting a good whacking.
He's just hitting the snare really hard. That counts.
I think it adds to the bounce and the beat
Bang!
and the...
Bang!
Yeah, and I think it contrasts nicely with the shaker. The maracas.
Yeah. Point to you. I like the way that the guitar emphasizes the 7th note.
Same.
Gives it a very Mixolydian feel.
Mixolydian.
Mixolydian.
Isn't that what they call people who make cocktails?
Yes, that's right. That's exactly correct. And by that, I mean that it's landing on this note. Do-da-do, do-do. Makes it a little discordant. But then it also follows through the key change as well. Do-do, do-do. The song's in a major key. The major scale that song is in the scale of the major scale.
What?
The major scale for that key sounds like this. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Should you get the...
Yeah, all right. I wasn't really handling it. Quite simply, this is A major. And this is A major with more of a Mixolydian feel. As opposed to... This is that 7th note that lends it that feel. The guitar always lands on that note. That note there is what gives A major its rock and rolly feel. Dirties the chord up a little bit. I think the anchor's gonna come back to that. The bass does it as well. It's playing that note there. It's that same note that gives A major its Mixolydian feel. Plus it's a cool riff. Ooh, I've just thought of another point. Can I include it?
No. But, okay, you can't get a point for it.
Okay. In support of my later point, I would just like to say the Mixolydian feel, that 7th chord, dirties things up a little bit.
Oh.
Okay. Good. It's your turn.
My third point is that it's a good description of what good medical practice should look like.
I like it. I'm not being sarcastic.
He does everything he can. He'll come to your house day or night.
House calls.
House calls. And at the end, you're feeling fine.
Yeah, you get a point. It's my turn?
Yes.
I like the way that Paul McCartney's singing the harmony at Man You Must Believe. Specifically, I like the way that his vocal is swooping up.
I have that exact point.
The way that while John's is swooping down.
He helps you to understand.
We should sing that. Do you want to sing that?
Yeah.
Which do you want? High or low? I like how much thought you put into this.
Pick one, damn it. I will sing the lower harmony.
Okay.
You're a new and better man. He helps you to understand. Stand.
He does everything he can, Dr. Robert. But yeah, there's that sort of really
It's a-
discordant point where the voices are diverging, but lazily and slowly. That's cool.
Not tense and fraught like I just did it.
Okay, let's try and do it again, but hold the mid-swoop note so that you can hear the discordance. So like swoop part of the way and stop. You're a new and better man.
Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, do you hear how
Okay.
discordant that was? It's so much easier when there's a second voice here. Do I get a point?
No, because I had that exact point.
Damn it.
Paul's harmony, sliding up to note, pleasing.
Please. No
Righto,
point.
no points.
Okay.
My next point's a bit silly, which is that it's fun to groove to, particularly the key change. This needs an embodied demonstration.
Oh, what are you trying to show me? I was daydreaming. I'm so sorry.
so rude.
I was thinking about the chord change. Go on.
When the key change is down, you're like, oh, that's good, and you want to like boogie even lower. But it's difficult to do in this space.
Okay, we can try.
See, here you can do a highbrow twist. Oh, that's good.
Yes, point to you. We're not awarding bonus points, but if we were, I'd give you a bonus point for originality on that one. Okay, my next point is that he's a man, you must believe, that key change doesn't return back up at the end of the verse. It stays in the second key. Da, da, Dr. Robert. It doesn't return to its original key, its home key. It could,
But it doesn't.
but it doesn't. That's my point.
Yeah, you get a point.
Nice.
My next point has to do with the bridge.
Well.
And the surprise
Well.
choral interlude. And I can just see them doing this. Or perhaps this.
It is very evocative. So you
So
do
I
like
don't
that
get-
it has like a choral break.
Yeah, and I'm always a fan of songs that jolt your attention abruptly like that and give you pause.
So you like this album, huh?
Yeah, I do like the song. So you're mid boogie, and then suddenly you're like, wait, what? But it doesn't go on for too long, and you can get back. And I'm always the fan of a good organ as well. But maybe that's the second.
It's not an organ. It's a harmonium.
Oh,
John's playing it.
does your friend Paul have one of those?
No, but my friend Richard does.
Who's Richard?
You're so popular. He's
Yes.
he's a colleague of mine. Actually, he watches the show. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Richard.
Can I borrow your harmonium?
Point.
Yes, point.
Ding, 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 ding.
Okay, my point is actually about the harmonium. I like
Lovely.
that the harmonium is a stand-in for an organ. It's what gives it that churchy vibe. It's interesting because they're within the same family of instruments, and that is a reed instrument. So
Does it
same
have
as
pipes?
no. The way the sound is generated is that air is blown. Oh no, Editor Nancy here. Unfortunately, that particular clip cut out while we were filming, so I've now been given the task of explaining to you what a free reed aerophone is. Thanks. Essentially, a free reed instrument is one that produces sound as air flows past a vibrating reed inside a frame. On with the show. The churchy break, it paints a vision of Dr. Robert as like a deity or a saint who's doling out good health to his
Clients?
constituents,
Followers?
his congregation.
Congregation. You get a point.
Thank you. Your turn.
My next point still has to do with the medical establishment. I like that there's a National Health Service shout out as well. I think that's my last medical one, and then I can get back to the music.
My friend works for the National Health Dr. Robert. Okay. I like the way that it jolts us out of the well bridge straight back into the verse. Sort of like what you were saying about how you can just get back to your boogieing. Jolting when you go in, and it's jolting when you come out. What?
Excuse me?
We're in church. And boogie. Do I get that point?
Yeah, technically I made it, but you can have that point.
You did not.
My next point is that the bass is doing some fun things in the third verse/outro section.
Oh yeah, I heard that. He uses a similar pattern in I Feel Fine. Bass correspondent, show us that little lick there. Thanks. I like all of the suspended chords, which the piano correspondent is going to explain to us now. If you take B major, for example, these are the 3 notes that you need to make up B major. Only those 3. But George Harrison in his guitar part is adding little notes like this. This one here doesn't belong. It just sounds really pretty with the rest of them. And then they use it again in the harmonies of the Well, Well, Well section. Well, well, well. Again, I think that makes the song a bit more interesting. Back to you. Sus chords.
Yeah, the ones that are a little sus.
That's what they're called. Sus chords. They're all throughout the song. Like there's one here.
There's a piano right there.
No, I think my singing's good enough in this case. Do I get a point for that?
Yes.
Sus chords, yes. I don't think I'm playing, so I don't think I get any points for this. But also, the song has such an interesting melody. Listen to this. Isn't that unusual?
My next point is I like the surprise, very final Dr. Robert during the fade out.
Oh yeah, I know the one you mean. This one.
Just in case you'd forgotten the name and you needed to write down the name and number one more time. Yeah. Don't forget, Dr. Robert.
Yeah,
and
I like
it's a
that.
little bit,
Rushed?
yeah.
Sudden? It's like it doesn't really know what note it is. Dr. Robert!
Do I get a point?
Yep. Woo. I like how the harmonies in the Well, Well, Well section are moving about. They all sort of go up and down, but they're doing so contrary-wise, to quote Lewis Carroll. So there's one in the middle that's just singing the same note. I think that's George. Well, 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 you're feeling fine. Is also what the guitar is doing. Ding, ding, da, ding, ding. Nice little fanfare. But the other 2 are doing this. Do you want the top or the bottom?
Well, I want the top. Get all nervous and pressured.
You don't need
and
to be nervous.
Oh.
I'm nurturing and caring and not at all intimidating. Well, 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 he'll make you. See, it is parallel at the end.
What is he making you?
Well, 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 he'll make you. He'll make you well, well, well.
Oh, I see. That makes sense. Okay.
But
Does
what
it
is
sound
that
like a Christmas carol?
harmonies? Yeah. So, like, it sounds like a carol. They've written
Yeah.
it so that it sounds like a religious song.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's sing it again. It was really nice. Well, 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 he'll make you.
Dr. Robert.
But doesn't that sound lovely? And it works so well with George doing the well, 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 you're feeling.
Where's our third sister?
I know.
Jeez.
We could get Steph. Okay, so your part is well, well, well.
Is it just the exact same note?
That's the one.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, can do that. Well, 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 you're feeling fine. Well, well, well.
He'll make you.
He'll
Correct.
make You go. Okay.
Well, 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 you're feeling fine. Well, 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 he'll make you.
Nice.
That was good.
Nice. We sound good.
A successful try.
We should be in a band.
Do I get a point for that? The way the harmonies move.
Yeah.
Okay, your turn.
My next point is that if it is about, am I allowed to say drugs?
You're allowed to say drugs, yes.
Okay. If it is about drugs,
It is about drugs.
Robert is a vague enough name that the real person can maintain their anonymity.
Yeah, except for that Paul McCartney quote. Does sort of identify him. You could plausibly say, oh, Robert? I made that name up.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. The vagueness. I like how, like Mr. Kite and A Day in the Life, John Lennon has taken something that somebody said to him or that he saw or he read, and it might just be a sentence, and he's fleshed it out into this whole big story.
That's a good one.
He goes into his qualities, what he's like, what he wants for you, how he administers his medical care.
Orally.
No.
Take a drink from his special cup.
Oh, you're right. In real life, though, it was syringally, intravenously.
Syringally.
Straight to the veins.
How many more do you have?
A couple. Not too many. Do you have any more?
Just that I like the line, take a drink from his special cup.
His special cup. I like the way that the whole song reads as an advertisement for the good doctor.
Dr. Robert!
Ring my friend. Day or night, he'll be there anytime at all.
Da-da-da. Anytime at all.
Anytime at all. All you gotta do is call. I like that there are several times in the song where it sounds like he's singing Bob Robert.
Bob Robert.
Ring my friend, I said you'd call Bob Robert.
He probably is. Knowing John Lennon, he probably is.
Like that last one at the end sounds like Bob Robert. Bob Robert.
That one was definitely Bob Robert.
Bob Robert. I really like the idea that this man's surname is actually Robert and his first name is Robert.
So you really can't miss him.
Dr. Robert. Okay, I'm getting a point for that. Okay, the point that I came up with before that I'm not allowed to use, the last one, is that Mixolydian is rough and dirty. Well, we stop using that Mixolydian note and it becomes pure and clean and whole. Lee. And it feels like we've washed away the dirty notes.
Oh, interesting.
The verses have this Mixolydian feel. However, when we get to the well section, if that were Mixolydian, it would sound like this. But it doesn't. It goes, which gives it this very pure, kind of holy feeling. This sounds much cleaner and purer than this. Whatever that means. Is that everything?
I think so.
Okay, how many pounds?
How many pounds?
How many pence?
I have 12 points.
I also have 12 points.
Well, that's nice.
High five.
Nice.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Do you think we've got enough here to convince people that they should listen to this song more than just once and certainly never skip?
That, and it's also only like 2 minutes and 50 seconds, so
You can deal.
you can deal. And it's a nice, I should have put this down. Okay, bonus point that isn't going to be counted, but it's a nice break between the sad song before that you did 2 weeks ago.
That's another thing that this album does well, is it's great sequencing. You never have too many
Sad songs?
sad songs, which say so much.
Yeah, they do. What's the one after?
Yeah,
Yeah, that one's not sad. It's just kind of mellow.
I do have another point. My other point is that so many of the songs end in a totally unconventional way.
Dr. Robert!
Yeah, but like it changes the key again and then never resolves it.
Yeah,
It drops down again. That's everything we want to say to the internet today?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, now we're gonna sing that comment. This is a comment that I recently received on YouTube about a video that I did about the Beatles, and we're now going to sing it to you to the tune of Dr. Robert. Am I doing the bottom part again?
Yes.
Okay. I find it interesting how all of a sudden these channels are popping up by the least likely people to listen to rock.
Hey.
Let alone the Beatles? Question mark. The scripting is amazing. The acting is great. To make you think they are all really fans, when all it is another way to erase the whitewashed thumbs down.
Maybe every week you should sing a
How did we get into this?
Yeah, let me do. Hold. I'm not there yet. So please love me do. Whoa, love me do. Yeah, love me do.
Final Friday. That's what I want. Yeah, that's what I want.
That's what I want.
Which means that today's track listens like this. Good. Off to a great start. The dentist who spiked John and George. No, he didn't. Spike.
Impale.
Ode to Billie Jean.
Not Billy Joel.
My lover. The kid is not my son. Or maybe Robert Fraser. a gallery owner in London who moonlighted as a drug dealer to London's most famous people, who also were partaking in drugs, as opposed to London's famous teetotalers. If I'm gone too long, don't forget where you belong. When the stars come out, remember you are mine.
Can I put my glasses back on?
Yeah, well,
They help me hear better.
He helps you to understand.
She does everything she can to...
Robert could be a woman.
That's true. And now Billy Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge. Ding, 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 ding.
I've never been on speed, so I could be wrong. Maybe it's just like... To be clear, I do not do the drugs. I'll spend my days.
I'll spend my days just mooning, so sad and blue. Ow.
That's what the plant thinks too.
Good King Wenceslas
down. I don't actually know the words beyond
went
Good
to
King
town on the feast. He doesn't go to town. I don't know what the lyrics are.
That's Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony. 3, 4.
Good King West.
No. Doctor.
Oh.
What is this episode about, Anna?
Christmas carols.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Damn straight. 1, 2, 3, 4.
How can you stand to be so cruel?
I think you do a lot of like just humming and singing to yourself more than I do.
I live alone. When you go back through the tape, you'll find the
Yeah,
spot.
I will. It's not taped, Anna. It's digital. Chapter 12. I want to tell you. We are nearing the end of our track-by-track trek through Revolver, which means that today we have come to the third George Harrison track on this fine record. This is especially significant because George Harrison has never been, nor will ever be, afforded this much real estate on a Beatles record. So let's hear what he's got for us. I want to tell you. Third track from the end, side 2, Revolver. I've subtitled this episode The Diminished Beatle for 2 reasons. Here's the first, and we've touched on this a little bit in the Taxman episode, but I'd like to expand on it. George Harrison met Paul McCartney when he was in his very early teens. He is 9 months younger than Paul, but he had a very, very young face, so he looked much younger. It's pretty early in the episode, but we're going to go straight to the Storytime correspondent to tell us more. Good day to you one and all. We'll be taking today's reading from The Good Book. Paul says, being close to each other in age, we talked, although I tended to talk down to him because he was a year younger. 9 months.
He was always 9 months older than I. Even now, he's still 9 months older than me.
This problem was only exacerbated when Paul brought George to John. George looked even younger than Paul, and Paul looked about 10 with his baby face. It was too much. George was just too young. I didn't want to know at first. He was doing a delivery round and seemed a kid. He came around once and asked me to go to the pictures with him, but I pretended I was busy. I didn't dig him until I got to know him. John had already been hesitant about bringing Paul onto the band because Paul was much younger than John was. A 2-year age gap when you're 15 and 17 is significant. It's not like when you're 34 and 36, where you're basically the same age. You're in different life stages when you're 15 and 17. So along comes young Paul with his friend, an even younger George Harrison, a 14-year-old. 17-year-old John Lennon was really not sure about it, but he had to concede that George could play raunchy.
I said, go on, George, get your guitar out. Go on, you show him, man. I thought, yeah. And he got it out. Down, 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 sure enough. Note perfect. Raunchy. You're in.
John and Paul agreed that he had the necessary skills to be a part of the band, but they treated him like a younger brother.
Might have been a failing of mine to tend to sort of talk down to him because I'd known him as a younger kid.
And while George did eventually grow out of his baby face, the other two didn't grow out of the way that they were treating him. So they're the Quarrymen, and then they're the Silver Beatles, and then they're Johnny and the Moondogs. They go to Germany, they play together as a band for hundreds and hundreds of hours, and eventually, as we all know, they make it big.
The one and only fabulous Beatles!
In the early days of the Beatles, and when I say early days, I mean the first couple of years, John and Paul are the kingpins of the band. George was afforded 1, maybe 2 songs per album. He did contribute a song called Don't Bother Me.
So go away, leave me alone, don't bother me.
Which I think is a great song. It's certainly a solid first effort. But otherwise, the other two either threw him a cover or wrote a song especially for him. Until we get to Help, where he contributes 2 original songs. I Need You.
I need you.
And You Like Me Too Much.
You like me too much and I like you.
In an interview with Melody Maker in the mid-60s, George said that he felt like he was at a disadvantage because John and Paul each had a co-writing partner. If they were struggling with something, they could go to the other person and they could work it out together. I think that's quite telling. It reveals that either he didn't feel comfortable to go to the others for help, or the others weren't really as interested in helping him as they were in working with each other. He said, and I quote, "When you're competing against John and Paul, you have to be very good to even get in the same league." And so that's what he did. He upped his game. He leveled up as a musician. He got very good. And from Rubber Soul onwards, I would argue that he contributed some of the best songs on every single Beatles album. That brings us to Revolver. And I believe that his contributions to this album, all 3 of them, demonstrate exactly why he was deserving of more space on future Beatles albums. To catch us up, 1965 Beatles do tours. They make a movie.
Not just anybody.
They put out 2 albums.
You're gonna lose that girl. Beep, 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 yeah.
And at the end of the year, they went, "We're not gonna do another movie. We're gonna take a break." So they took a sort of Beatles sabbatical. Each went away and did his own thing, discovered what he loved. And what George did during this time is consume a lot of Indian music, listen to a lot of it, absorb it into his pores. He'd also done LSD recently, so he was processing, integrating. George says of his first experience with LSD, "A light bulb went on in my head, an illumination goes on inside. In 10 minutes, I lived 1,000 years. And all of this together, to me, shows a George Harrison who is self-actualizing. He is a young person who is figuring out the kind of adult man that he is to become. He has new thoughts, he has new ideas, he's forming a life philosophy. He is becoming his authentic self. And in this process, I think he's finding that he actually has things to contribute to the band beyond the odd solo. His head is filled with things to say. And when the time comes to record the next album, George is bringing that whole self to the recording studio. For a start, he's bringing music from a different culture, new to the other Beatles, which massively influences the direction of the album. He contributes not only his own songs, but this whole novel approach to writing music that the others really buy into and that they incorporate into their own songs as well. You can hear it in the drone and songs like She Said, She Said. Tomorrow Never Knows. And of course this music really blossoms on the track Love You To. So as they're nearing the end of this recording project, they find that John hasn't written a single new song in about 6 weeks since he wrote I'm Only Sleeping on the job. George, who was flourishing creatively at the time, picks up the shortfall. He brings forward not 1, but 2 options for new songs for them to pick up, and the one that is selected is I Want to Tell You. Out of interest, the one that was not selected is Isn't It a Pity?
Isn't it a pity?
So now he's got 3 songs on the album. This has never happened before. He's got the opening track. a position of honor. He seems poised to take his place as an equal partner in the songwriting of the Beatles. But alas, it was not to be. He was only allotted one song on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And yeah, it was 5.5 minutes, but still it's only one song. And the same on Magical Mystery Tour, an EP, to be sure, but only one song. And he was given a single song for every side of the White Album.
Everywhere there's lots of piggies living piggy lives.
Despite this, the songs that he contributed, I think, are some of the strongest on every album. Besides the obvious classics like While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Something and Here Comes the Sun, there are all of those beautiful deep cuts, like It's All Too Much. Or one of my favorite George songs, Long, Long, Long. In the early days of the Beatles, he didn't really have much to contribute, but this was not the case by 1968. George says, I'd always had a couple of ones I was working on or thinking about, and in the later years I did have a huge backload. So while they were giving space to songs like Wild Honey Pie, no disrespect to Wild Honey Pie, but that song was taking a spot that George could have been using. You know? He has stated that John and Paul just weren't that interested in giving his songs as much attention as their own songs. And as we saw in Get Back, George was sitting on a goldmine of strong material, but he was made to sit back and watch the John and Paul show. With the knowledge that he had songs to bring to the band that were arguably better than some of the tracks that were being brought to the Get Back sessions. And he eventually walked out.
I think I'll be leaving the band now.
When?
Now.
He had to wait until after the Beatles had broken up for his redemption. At the end of 1970, he released All Things Must Pass, which is largely a triple album of material that had been rejected by his Beatle peers. He had a wealth of excellent songs to draw from and put on this album. Among them was Isn't It a Pity, which was rejected for Revolver. It was a massive success. It is an exceptionally good album. He was underrated, and I believe that his place in the Beatles was one of diminishment, of untapped potential, of unused talent. So that's the first reason that I've used the word diminished in the subtitle. The second is kind of just a fun musical play on words. Because George Harrison is a man who loves a diminished chord. Let's go now to the piano correspondent who will tell us what that means. Hello! As simply as possible, you diminish a chord when you shrink it very slightly like this. There's my chord, B minor. There's my diminished chord. Dissonant. The dissonant chord that's being used in this song is especially interesting because, as the anchor will tell you soon enough, it's actually an E chord with a flat 9. But within that chord, you've got two diminished chords. You've got this one and this one. So, on this bass note. That's why it's so uncomfortable when Paul plays. That's an uncomfortable chord, inherently. That's what I think, anyway. The diminished chord is one that is scattered throughout George Harrison's compositions. You can hear it on Blue Jay Way, C minor, diminished. Old Brown Shoe, here it comes. Wah wah, whatever this hideous thing is. Isn't it a pity?
Isn't it a pity?
Wah. Here comes the moon.
The storm.
Possibly on Free as a Bird. I'm not clear on who wrote this part, but it kind of does sound like George. Because, as I said, he loves diminished chords. And of course, on this song, I Want to Tell You.
When you're here.
It's sets the whole tone of the song. It's great word painting. It's a dissonant, uncomfortable chord in a song about a dissonant, uncomfortable situation. George says, I realized the chords I knew at the time just didn't capture that feeling. Now, if we're gonna be pedantic, and I'm sure some of you are really eager for me to be pedantic, technically it's an E chord with a flattened 9 at the top. But an E chord with a flattened 9 is basically a diminished B chord with an E in the bass. So I'm calling it a diminished chord. I hope that's okay. I like how you always show up for the Beatles episodes. You must really be into the Beatles. Can I tell you a secret? I am too. And that chord is held on for an uncomfortably long time. See, Paul's banging away on that chord for ages before we finally resolve. Despite that, it never really feels like the song fully concludes. It has a slow fade in, it has a slow fade out. It's like we're getting a glimpse into what George is experiencing and what he's trying to process mentally. It's not like a self-contained story with a beginning and an end, it's just a moment in time. It's an ongoing situation. It fits really well in a song that is full of this disorienting rejection of musical convention. Western musical convention, I should say. For instance, there's like a half bar in the verse. I'll show you. That is what I'm here for. So you would expect a verse to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But instead it does this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like, hold on. We're halfway through a bar. Bam, we're at the beginning of the next one. And this is an example, I think, of the way that George's Indian music studies, formal or not, are infusing into the rest of the music that's being made by the Beatles. Like, this isn't an overtly Indian-influenced song, but it has moments like that. That is something that is very unusual at this point in popular Western music. But as George says of Indian music, to me, it is the only really great music now, and it makes Western 3 or 4 beat type stuff seem somehow dead. The lyrics are about overwhelm, about disorganized thought chaos. I want to tell you, my head is filled with things to say. It's a song about frustration. I think that's what that piano chord really achieves. It feels like there are too many notes, there are too many thoughts. They're clashing, they're discordant, they're dissonant. All wonderful things in music. Love it. Because they set up a tension to be beautifully released. At least until the next time they build up the tension, right? And that sort of overabundance of things to say really comes through in the way that he delivers some of the lines. Like this one. They're not fitting neatly into the beats in the measure. They're sort of tumbling over each other to a very informal, loose rhythm. Sometimes I wish I knew you well, then I could speak my mind and tell you. See, it doesn't keep to the rhythm of the song in the same way that his thoughts won't fit into neat little boxes. That's my interpretation anyway. I think it's brilliant. A+, George Harrison. And the concept of uncertainty seems to be a theme that runs through a lot of his music. Maybe you'll understand. Carve your number on my wall and maybe you'll get a call from me. You're asking me, will my love grow? I don't know. I think there's something beautiful about that philosophical approach, about the questioning, about the acceptance of not having the answer. It just feels very George. Forgive me, but I'm gonna go full music nerd on this one. The diminished chord is the perfect chord to demonstrate that, to communicate it to us. A thing that I find fascinating about the song is that it feels kind of like the antithesis to Got to Get You Into My Life, the following song. It's a similar rhythm, it's got a similar kind of gallop. I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find. The bass is pretty similar as well. And because the two songs are so similar and right next to each other, I think they reveal the fundamental differences between the two songwriters and their approach to songwriting, but also their personalities. Got to Get You Into My Life is a song that is boisterous and buoyant, celebratory, explosively joyous. It's an extroverted song. And I feel like that defines Paul McCartney, or at least how Paul McCartney presents himself as a Beatle. I Want to Tell You, on the other hand, is kind of brooding, a little bit confrontational, maybe even uncomfortable in places, dissonant, it's musing, it's pensive, contemplative, introspective. These are all words that I would use to describe the quiet Beatle, George Harrison. So there we go. George Harrison, the diminished Beatle, and also the diminished Beatle. Now I'm going to get into some sundry points that, like George Harrison's thoughts, wouldn't fit neatly into little boxes. So in no particular order, here we go. Number 1. George Harrison had a really hard time naming songs. He wouldn't name them until he basically ran out of time. Then he would throw a title at them, which maybe is why Love You To is such an unusual title. Love You To what? In any case, the working title for Love You To was Granny Smith, and perhaps John Lennon was frustrated when George Harrison wouldn't provide a title for this one, which he jokingly dubbed Granny Smith Part Friggin' 2.
What do you call it? What's it called? Granny Smith Part Friggin' 2.
Tell You. That's a nice title. Tell You.
You've never had a title, sir. For anything's ever done for.
Lax and superb.
So I'd like to offer up some alternative titles. Like, how do we feel about I've Got Time? Things to Say. Or my favorite, It's Only Me, parenthetical, It's Not My Mind. I think that's a good one. That's what I would call it if I had written this song and I was George Harrison. 2. This song is significant because it was the first that Paul recorded his bass separately for. He would eventually make this a practice with future recordings. I think this reflects a massive turning point for the band, because he'd been a decent bassist before. There are some fantastic bass lines on earlier albums. From this album, he's really consciously crafting the best bass part for the song. It is from this point forward that you start to get some of the really beautiful, poignant, dynamic bass parts on Beatles songs. And it starts here. It's also an interesting point because he was a little bit of a control freak. And if you have the band recording all of their takes and then you go back afterwards and you record your bass line, then you have control over the harmonic structure of the song, because what the bass is doing can fundamentally shift the sound of a chord, as the piano correspondent will show us now. Okay, so let's say you've written a song in A major. And that's what it sounds like. It's an A major song. And you finish a recording session, you go home, and the bassist comes along and puts a G underneath it. Boom! Totally different song. Or a B above it. Again, it's still an A chord, but with a totally different feel. One of my favorites, A chord over a D bass. So you see, the bassist is really the person who sets the direction, the harmonic direction of the song. And that is a power that Paul takes. 3. This isn't particularly significant, just interesting. George Harrison recorded this song the day after Ravi Shankar agreed to take him on as a student. Pretty cool. 4. Paul's little nod to Indian music right at the end of the song. I love this because it feels like he's really paying respect or taking seriously this new obsession of George Harrison's. It's like he's really supporting that in his bandmate, despite everything I said earlier in the episode. Like, this is what makes Revolver so special. George Harrison has given the time, both on the physical record itself, but also in developing these songs, in the others taking them seriously, in John sitting down and actually writing songs with him together, like She Said, She Said. There's this moment of harmony in the band that I think is unique to this album, but I'll get into that another time. What was I talking about? This.
I've got time.
That's Paul doing his best impression, I guess, of Indian music. Not too shabby. 4. This riff here was the inspiration for the riff for Pleasant Valley Sunday by the Monkees. Sub-fun fact, that song was written by Carole King.
Another Pleasant Valley Sunday.
Point 6. Ringo's drums sounds amazing on this track. It is so punchy and so big. I don't know if it's just that this is the 2022 mix, but listen to this. Listen to the power behind it. Ugh. Smack! Bang! I hadn't really thought about the drum part so much before putting this episode together, but it's a really critical part, I think, in what makes this song so powerful. 7. The backing vocals are very similar to those from And Your Bird Can Sing, where there's a bit of vocal, tell me that you got everything you want, then a line sung by the three of them, and your bird can sing, and then one Beatle, but you don't get me, and then 3 Beatles, you don't get me. Harmony is kind of like an accent more than a feature.
I want to tell you, and it's filled with things to say. When you're here, all those words they seem to separate.
The backing vocals amplify these very specific parts of the verse, as opposed to the whole verse being harmonized. While we're talking about similarities, the end is also kind of similar to She Said, where a specific line becomes a refrain and they sing it over and over again through to a fade out. I think that was point 8. So point 9 is that Paul is singing his absolute guts out on this one. He's got that high harmony. Honestly, I think he is underrated as a male harmony singer because there's so much that this band wouldn't have been able to do without that piercing, powerful, high vocal part. Here's what I'm talking about. This is John's part. My head is filled with things to say, which is moderately high. Then Paul singing this. I don't even know if I can do it. My head is filled with things to say. Damn, Paul. That's a high note for me. Must be a hell of a high note for him. So let's conclude. Even though it may not be everyone's favorite, even though it's a deep cut on an album of some of the best songs of the 20th century, arguably some of the best songs of the 21st century, it's special because it is a third Harrison track on a Beatles record. You're purring like crazy there, buddy. The quiet Beatle gets to be just a little bit louder on this record with this song. Chapter 13. Got to get you into my life. Welcome back to another episode of Vinyl Friday, the Revolver Odyssey. Famously, the Beatles opened their recording sessions for Revolver with Tomorrow Never Knows.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream.
Which blows my mind, especially as they had only just finished recording Rubber Soul a few months earlier. It's just a massive change. We're not listening to that song today though. We're listening to the next song that they worked on after that. In his 1980 Playboy interview, John Lennon called today's song one of Paul's best, and I am inclined to agree. I think that the song that we're listening to today is the best song on Revolver, Fight Me, and it sounds like this. Oh, good song. To be fair, depending on my mood or the day of the week or what have you, I could probably make the argument that any song on this album is the best song on this album. It's just that I'd feel like making the argument for this one most often. Today, it's my favorite, so it's a good day to do a deep dive, a thorough breakdown of this incredible piece of music. Obviously, there are a lot of horns on this track, so we will be bringing back the brass correspondent. Her debut was not so illustrious. But I and all of the other correspondents have been working together with her this week, and we've put together something a little bit different. We are so excited to share it with you, and we'll be looking at it a little bit later in the episode, so hold on to your seats for that. So let's begin. From when they were teenagers, the Beatles loved American R&B. They were big fans of like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, the Shirelles.
Baby, it's you.
So when the time came to begin recording their next project, the Beatles had really hoped to do so at Stax Records in Memphis, Tennessee. It's the recording house that was the home of Otis Redding and Sam and Dave Booker T and the MGs. Wilson Pickett. Among others, et al. Paul said, and I quote, that music had a raw quality that for some reason you can't get in this country being England. Alas, it did not work out. They did end up recording this in Abbey Road Studios, but we will put a pin in this for later, so don't forget. It pains me to say this, but the first iteration of this song is not good. There is a reason that they continued to workshop this song. It sounds like this.
What can I do? What can I be? When I'm with you, I want to stay there.
Maybe it's because I know the released version like the back of my hand, but this version sounds so wrong with acoustic guitar and harmonium. They haven't laid down a bass track yet, so it's incredibly empty. It's got these backing vocals that I think sound a little bit too much like Dr. Robert.
Every single day of my life.
You can hear the uncertainty in the direction of the song when he sings,
Got to get you into my life somehow, some way.
Even the discussion at the beginning of the song, where they're all making suggestions about the best way to start the song, it hasn't found its feet yet.
So how do we get into it?
Well, George carries on counting, but you just start on 3.
Just switch it in so you don't get any the organ starting up.
Why though?
1, 2, 3, 4.
They sing this like, I need your love part for the bridge of the song.
I need your love. I need your love. I need your love.
I don't feel like that works. I do enjoy Paul's vocal ad-libs at the end of the song. But I don't think it is their best work. Unfortunately, they came back the next day and decided to do a little bit more with it. That session is a big improvement, partly because George had started to experiment with this earwormy little guitar riff. And another reason is that with the addition of the bass part, you get a very tasty little chord in the verse. Piano correspondent, can you tell us more, please? Hello again, friends. It's nice to see you. So we've discussed this in a different episode recently, but essentially the bass is an instrument that is almost in charge of the direction of the song. So once again, if your song is in G, and then you go down to an F, and then you come back up to G, it sounds like this. But then you add the bass, and the bass, instead of dropping down to the F, stays on the G, which gives us, in context, I think that is part of what gives it that unbridled joy. That chord there. Oh, that is one of my favorite chords. So you've got Paul and George laying down this dual guitar part, which sounds very cool. And there's this layer of fuzz that they're playing around with. It's very reminiscent of Think For Yourself off Rubber Soul. Which, and I cannot overstate this, was only recorded a few months ago. Just the transformation, the maturation, the development, it's incredible. But maybe I'll get into that a bit more in a later video. Now is not the time, Nancy. I think this version is decent, but it is not peak Got to Get You Into My Life. So I think they decided that they had done everything that they could with it at this point, and they left it for about a month. Paul must have spent quite a lot of that month listening to soul records. And it's a good thing too, because that Stax Motown influence took a fairly bad song and made it better. Get it? Because he came back with a head full of horn parts, basically. And decided to apply that to this song. So they bring in 5 session musicians, 2 of whom were recruited by Paul McCartney himself from a club where I used to go and listen to music after work. They were 3 trumpets and 2 saxophones, 5 musicians. One of the trumpeters, whose name was Les Condon, was asked about this session later, and of it he said, well, they didn't have a thing written down. We'll go to our Storytime correspondent who can elaborate on that for us. Hello, Vinyl Friday family fancy meeting you here. Tenor saxophonist Peter Coe says, Paul and George Martin were in charge. There was nothing written down, but Paul sat at the piano and showed us what he wanted. I remember we tried it a few times to get the feel right, and then John Lennon, who was in the control room, stuck his thumb aloft and shouted, got it! Love the enthusiasm! Jeff Emmerich was also a big part of why the finished product of this song was so damn good. I close-mic'd the instruments, actually put the mics right down into the bells, instead of the standard technique of placing them 4 feet away, and then applied severe limiting to the sound. So a limiter is a piece of studio equipment which catches the loudest parts of a song and basically creates like a hard ceiling so that the volume can't exceed that level, which means that the recording can't distort or clip. So that's the reason behind the sort of harsh, brash, aggressive tone of the trumpet and saxophone parts. They had microphones buried in their bells. A problem I have with the earlier versions of the song is that the first is way too sparse, way too empty, and the second takes that really lovely guitar riff but then overuses it. It's too busy, there's too much of it. With this horn recording session, they recorded a range of different parts, and then Paul and George Martin got together afterwards and picked and chose the ones that they wanted to keep for the final recording. And I think they did a bloody brilliant job, because the brass now fills those spaces, but it doesn't overwhelm or crowd the song. There isn't too much of it. It's very tasteful. It's beautifully done. It's almost like they're good at this. I'd like to examine this more closely now, so without further ado, we will cross to the brass correspondent and a bunch of the other correspondents, where they will dazzle us with a perhaps slightly unconventional rendition of this horn part. And hopefully, the brass correspondent will redeem herself after her dismal performance of the Grassroots Midnight Confessions. Take it away, friends! Hello. If you'll allow me to make a quick interruption. I am Fathom, the proprietor of this channel, a songwriter, and a maker of experimental musical instruments. I call this one an ullulophone. Quite simply, an ullulophone is made of a butchered school recorder, a small piece of PVC pipe, and a balloon stretched across the top. It sounds like this. The correspondents will give you a demonstration, right about now. Basically, from here until the rest of the episode, I'm going to be looking at why this song works. I think having listened to that lovely rendition, at least I hope you think it was lovely, we enjoyed making it, I think the brass is the most logical place to start. Here we go! First thing I like about the brass is that this track opens on a triumphant, explosive fanfare. And the cuts, they're so clean. Lovely. Excellent direction from George Martin and Paul, I'm sure. This is one of the things that's so magical about horns. They can do a thing that the guitars couldn't. That is dynamics. You can play dynamically on guitar, but you can't increase the volume of a note once you've played it. In fact, it does the opposite. The sound decays from the moment that you've, struck your chord. Horns, though, you can build them up. And I think that was one of the missing elements with the guitar version of this song. I'll find a good crescendo. Oh, when I say play dynamically, I mean that you can swell the volume or you can drop the volume. You'll see what I mean. See, it starts quietly, it builds up. Boom! I love that part in particular because it builds this tension. You feel like it's going to explode forth. And the first time it doesn't. The first time it's a psych. We're back at the verse. Chorus? No, verse. But the second time, chorus! Boom! They've teased it the first time, and they fulfilled the second time. Very satisfying. So it's not just about the notes that are being played, it's about how they're being played. Beautifully directed. I like that the saxes match what the bass is doing in this descending part right here. So the bass and the saxes are doing that descending line in tandem. It's a very cool way to add interest to what the bass is doing. I also like that the horns are being played with this very staccato clipped da, 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 as opposed to da, 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 da. And I think that really matches the tone of the lyrics. There are so many of them. They're very rhythmic. But da 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 da. It has the same flavor as da 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 da. It's like this juxtaposition of a whole bunch of frenzied short staccato notes combined with these very long, drawn out ones. It works really well. It's subtle, but it's what the vocals are doing as well. So it's a really well written part. And they aren't happening at the same time, they're sort of feeding off each other, calling and responding. So, for instance, if you listen to the ends of the lines of the verses, the vocal is static. And it's bolstered by these trumpets underneath that are also static, and then one of them pulls away and plays this little responding part to what the vocals have just done. Here, static. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. And this is the thing, right? The brass is this like self-contained piece of music within a piece of music with these rhythmic and melodic motifs. For instance, they are teased in the verse, consummated at the chorus, and of course it bookends the song in the introduction and then again at the end. And it takes us out. The dropout at the end of the chorus makes that unaccompanied brass part all that more impactful. Isn't that great? It's so enjoyable. I also love this. It's that bend. It's just played so well by George and Paul. This guitar part, from which the brass parts are descended, gets this little nod right at the end of the song before it hands back over to the brass to take us through to the end. The second version of the song has an overwhelming amount of guitar, but just this little touch with that trademark Revolver snarl is perfect. It's like a novel reinterpretation of a theme that we are now really familiar with by this point in the song. It keeps the song interesting. It stops the brass from becoming too boring and repetitive, which I think was the problem the guitar had in the first place. What do you think? Do you agree? Is the purring anything to go by? And it takes the soul song and makes it just a little bit rockier, just a little bit harder. It's just got an edge to it that is specific to Revolver. And that brings us to the end of the song. The outro of the song is driven by this ever-rising brass part, which means that it fades out in an absolute frenzy, like this. Listen to these high trumpet parts. And then it goes up higher, here. Absolute frenzy. There's just like a whole party happening at the back half of this song. What a great way to end. I know that we haven't yet reached the last song on this album, but I feel like that great frenzied fade out sort of crossfades beautifully into the next track. Not to spoil anything, we will come to that in about 2 weeks. I think that's about all I have to say about the brass today anyway. Let's have a quick chat about the rhythm section. I think that the bass part in this track is surprisingly funky, and it's
propelled by these really thunderous licks. Better demonstrated than described. Bass correspondent? Hey team, how's it hanging? There's also that little skip that it does in the descending part, which gives the song its bounce. Did you catch it? It's that bit that goes doo-dee-doo. It's pretty cool. I like that bit a lot. Back to you. And Ringo, of course, is playing these clean, unadorned drum parts to make space for those resplendent horns. It's really the only point where he gets to shine. It's time for us to talk about the voice. I'm so glad that they got rid of the backing vocals for this song, because it is the perfect showcase of the tonal range of Paul's voice. On this track, he has his Stax roar at the chorus.
Hard to get you into my life.
But I would argue that he also has the sweetness of Motown in the verses. It's clear and it's precise.
And had you gone, you knew in time we'd meet again, for I had told you.
Brace yourselves, I'm going to make a superlative statement. I think that this is one of Paul McCartney's best vocal performances ever. I mean, in those verses, his voice is lovely, it's accurate, it's very sweet. Ooh! Especially those there. Ooh, so passionate. There's so much emotion behind that, you know? And man, his vocals at the end.
At one point, while Paul was recording the lead vocal, John actually burst out of the control room to shout his encouragement, evidence of the camaraderie and teamwork that was so pervasive during the Revolver sessions. I just love that. John was so moved by that incredible vocal performance of Paul's that he very impulsively ran into the room to...
And I can see why. Let's listen.
I've got to get you into my life.
I love that.
I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there.
Oh, so soulful.
And suddenly I see you.
Man, those high notes, the power behind those high notes. Such a great performance. So good. This is a song meant to be played loud. I hope you know that. I hope that's how you're listening to it, but not for sustained periods. Protect your ears, folks. The melody and the lyrics and the arrangement of the song are great. For a start, this is the perfect key for this song. Not all keys work for every song. Different keys have like corresponding emotional states, which means that if you put this song in a different key, it wouldn't sound right. It wouldn't convey the same kind of energy. For example, I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. Doesn't have the energy. Or, was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. One, it's too high, and two, it just sounds a little bit too pure. It doesn't have that raw sound that Paul was looking for in the song. I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. It just doesn't have the same impact as I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. You know, these subtle things make a difference. It's why we love the songs we love. Back to you. This key sounds bright and hopeful. Also, the melody is very typical of Paul McCartney in that it bounds upwards. A lot of his melodies tend to do that. Here making each in Penny Lane, you say yes. Take a sad song, close your eyes and I'll kiss you. They trend upwards. And this song does that as well. And it gives the song that high energy. It's buoyant, it's celebratory, it's jubilant. I also think it's lyrically solid. And it serves, as I mentioned earlier, this very specific rhythmic function. It ba-da-da-da, 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 da-da-da-da. If you take a song like Here, There, and Everywhere, it's entirely about the melody. Ba, 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 ba. This one has the melodic aspect, but also the way that he's singing it, it's also a rhythmic instrument. I like that about this song as well. In that same Playboy interview, the full quote is, I think that was one of his best songs because the lyrics are good and I didn't write them. When I say that he could write lyrics if he took the effort, here's an example. I completely agree.
I think sometimes Paul McCartney tends to phone in his lyrics. I've talked about it before, but when he really puts his mind to it, he can absolutely crush it. There are several songs on this album that I think exemplify his abilities as a lyricist. This is one of them. John goes on to say that this song is about Paul's experiences with LSD, but Paul later corrected the record. He said, and I quote, "I'd been a rather straight, working-class lad, but when we started to get into pot, it seemed to me to be quite uplifting. To me it was mind-expanding, literally mind-expanding." He continues, "It was something that entered our lives, and I thought it would be a good idea to write a song with 'Got to Get You Into My Life,' and only I would know that I was talking about pot. That is, at least until he gave that interview. Now we all know." The last thing that I think makes this song work is that it is clearly a group effort. You've got George Harrison writing that guitar motif that will later become the centerpiece of the song, arguably. You've got George Martin doing what he does best, which is acting as a conduit for the Beatles' creative vision in order that it can be translated into something instrumental, but something which still captures that original Beatles intent. He really understood what they wanted and what they were trying to communicate, and he arranged instrumentally in a way that perfectly encapsulates that. He makes excellent arrangement choices accordingly. Geoff Emerick applying his young mind to innovating new miking techniques, new and completely forbidden at Abbey Road. You are absolutely not allowed to do that to microphones. Could have been an expensive mistake, but he persisted and revolutionized the way that we record instruments in rock music. He also helped to pioneer the sound that allowed them to thicken that horn section. Paul was saying that it sounded too empty, there wasn't enough body to it, and so he... The Storytime correspondent will tell us.
There were only 5 players on the session, and when it came to mix the song, Paul kept saying, "I wish we could make the brass sound bigger." George Martin replied, "Well, there's no way we're bringing them back in for another session. We've got to get the album wrapped up, and there's no more budget for outside players anyway." That's when I came up with the idea of dubbing the horn track onto a fresh piece of 2-track tape, then playing it back alongside the multi-track, but just slightly out of sync, which had the effect of doubling the horns. We're going to follow that up with a reading from this book, which comes with the Super Deluxe LP edition and was lent to me by my buddy Mike. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Manually syncing up the 2 tape machines was a tricky trial and error process. Tape machines ran at marginally different speeds, and so would drift out of synchronization, creating a phasing sound. By 1967, that sort of effect was used deliberately to color many of the Beatles' recordings. So again, further innovation from Mr. Geoff Emerick.
You've got John's attention and enthusiasm for the project, all of the times that he came bounding out of the control room with his unbridled passion for the way Paul was singing or the way that the horn parts were sounding. Even if he doesn't play a major role instrumentally in the song, he was 100% on board. He loved this song. Apparently until the day he died. Aww. So it goes. And Ringo... He's just Ringo. He can always be counted on to bring the good vibes. I think that is partly what you can hear at the beginning of that earliest version. Everybody is there, everybody is engaged, everybody is involved, everybody's piping in with their suggestions about the best way to make this song sound great. And so to conclude, Paul McCartney said of the period where they were recording this song and he was listening to the soul music, I quote, "That's often how things happen with me. I'll hear something on the radio and think, oh wow, I'm going to do my version of that. And that is precisely what is so special about the Beatles. They were frequently trying on another kind of mind, be it novel experiences or the music of others. But they were so organically skilled that in doing so, they invariably and unwittingly often came up with something that was both incredible and entirely unique. Entirely of themselves, entirely Beatles." In Paul's words, I quote, "When we finished Revolver, we realized that we'd found a new British sound, almost by accident." What more can you say? Chapter 14. Tomorrow Never Knows. Oh boy. This one's gonna be really big. This is it, folks. We've made it. We have been on this track-by-track voyage through the album Revolver by the Beatles
since February of this year, and it has been a trip. We've journeyed through an acerbic indictment of the UK tax system, an orchestral tragedy in 3 acts, an ode to lethargy. We have traveled through a portal to non-Western musical traditions, and back again just in time to catch a song for Paul's father.
Love never dies, watching her eyes and hoping I'm always.
Paul uses these chords to get into the B part. We got to be a fly on the wall for one of the most playful parties of the 1960s. We dissed Peter Fonda. We saluted life's simple pleasures.
Good day, sunshine.
We received a primer in power pop. We mourned a dying love. We received directions to a guy who can hook us up and boogie. We tried to listen to what George Harrison wanted to tell us, but he couldn't get the words out. And last time, we learned what it sounds like when you shove a microphone down the bell of a trumpet. Now we find ourselves here, standing at the threshold to the doors of perception. If we open this door, we will hear a piece of music which blends the most contemporary of Western sounds with the most ancient of Eastern. We will witness the genesis of multiple technological innovations that are still in use to this day. We will look on at the limits of popular music being broadened and redefined. Quite frankly, our minds will be blown. And more importantly, we will never be the same again. Are you ready for that? I thought so. Come along. God, this truly is a remarkable piece of music. Let us recapitulate. The Beatles wrapped the recording of their previous album, Rubber Soul, in about the middle of November of 1965.
Beep, 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 yeah!
They performed the last concert of their UK tour in about mid-December 1965.
Don't care.
And after all of that, their manager Brian Epstein wanted them to follow this up with a third film following the success of their 1964 film, A Hard Day's Night, and their 1965 film, Help. But the Beatles were tired, and they did not want to do this. No, Brian, they said, we will not. They knew that they weren't due back in the studio to record their next album until early April of 1966, which meant that for the first time in approximately 4 years, the Beatles were able to take a break. It is at this point that I need to tell you about a criminally underrated children's cartoon from the 80s and 90s. It's a tenuous metaphor, but stay with me. The name of the show is Captain Planet.
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet!
And it follows these 5 teenagers endowed with superpowers who are trying to save the environment. And whenever they get stuck, which is often because they are absolutely hopeless, especially when the superpowers are taken into account, they can combine all of their powers.
Fire! Wind! Water!
Heart! Go play!
Heart! And summon Captain Planet, a superhero.
Captain Planet, he's our hero.
And that's exactly how Tomorrow Never Knows came about. Doesn't make sense? Don't sweat it, I will return to this analogy. Here is how the Beatles spent their winter and early spring 1966 sabbatical. Let's start with Paul. John, George, and Ringo had all bought extravagant homes in the suburbs, where they now lived. John at Kenwood, Ringo at Sunny Heights, and George in this
expensive bungalow in Esher. Thank you to everybody who corrected my pronunciation. As a quick aside, I think it's really adorable that they all bought houses so close to each other. Except Paul, who from around 1963 to 1966 lived in what was essentially the attic of his girlfriend Jane Asher's parents' house, crucially, in central London. Jane's family were artsy types, cultured types. For example, Jane's mother was a professor at the Guildhall School of Music and Art. And this family introduced Paul to art and culture that he had never before experienced. We'll go now to the Storytime correspondent, who will tell us a little more.
Now, this song has an excellent story, so you folks are going to be seeing a lot of me this episode. Strap in! We will be taking today's first reading from The Good Book. While the others had got married and moved out to suburbia, I had stayed in London and got into the art scene through friends like Robert Fraser and Barry Miles. We opened the Indica Gallery with John Dunbar, Peter Asher, and people like that. I always contend that I had quite a big period of this before John really got into it. It was only later when he went out with Yoko that he got back into London and visited all the galleries.
So in spending time with Jane's brother Peter, yes, the Peter of Peter and Gordon,
I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love,
and his friend Barry Miles, Paul was introduced to the music of composers like Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who were experimenting with a genre of music called musique concrète.
One piece was all little plink-plonks and interesting ideas.
In effect, instead of using instruments, the music is composed using pre-recorded sounds, which are often electronically altered, so sped up, played backwards, played in a loop, etc.
We always think of John as being the avant-garde one, with Yoko and so on, but at that time, John was living a comfortable suburban life in Weybridge.
Enter John Lennon. Now, while Paul had been spending his sabbatical, broadening his mind, exposing himself to... That's not what I mean. Familiarizing himself with new circles of creative thinkers, John was broadening his mind with the use of chemicals. In the previous year, he had consumed acid several times, and he was quite enamored of the experience. He was really taken with it. So at some point during their time off, John accompanies Paul to the aforementioned Indica Gallery in search of works by Nietzsche, who is a man with far too many consonants in his name and also a philosopher. He did find what he was looking for. He also found something that he was not looking for, but which would leave an enormous impression. Paul's new friend Barry Miles handed him a new book that had just arrived by the authors Timothy Leary, Ralph Manzner, and Ram Dass, who was not going by that name at that point, but that's irrelevant to our story. The book was called The Psychedelic Experience, and John was immediately absorbed.
Barry Miles himself says, John was delighted and curled up with the book on the old settee we had in the middle of the shop. It was one of life's great simple pleasures, I think, to curl up on a comfy couch and read a good book. Sort of like this, I guess.
The book refers to concepts like the game existence and the void, and also this.
Whenever in doubt, turn off your mind, relax, float downstream.
In John's words,
Leary was the one going around saying, take it, take it, take it. And we followed his instructions in his How to Take a Trip book. I did it just like he said in the book, and then I wrote Tomorrow Never Knows, which was almost the first acid song. Lay down all thoughts, surrender to the void, and all that shit which Leary had pinched from Book of the Dead.
Let's look now to George. During the making of Help, they were filming a scene in which a group of musicians were playing Indian instruments in the background. And George was very intrigued by these instruments. Shortly thereafter, David Crosby of the Byrds introduced George to the music of Ravi Shankar, according to David Crosby. This is the same David Crosby who, while they were in LA in 1965, had done acid with George and John. Acid had had a profound impact on George as well. He had gone from being an atheist to somebody who believed incontrovertibly in the existence of a higher power. And it's sort of a combination of these elements that caused George to immerse himself in the religious and philosophical traditions of India while he was on his sabbatical. And he spent a good deal of it listening to and learning to play Indian music. And what was Ringo up to while the others were filling their brain pans with new ideas? Truthfully, I don't know. So far as I can tell, he grew a beard. So as established, John has read this book. He writes a song, the group brings it to George Martin. I remember being in Brian Epstein's house in Chapel Street. We met up and John had a song that was all in the chord of C.
Which in our minds was okay, like Indian music's all on one chord. It's a perfectly good idea. I was wondering how George Martin was going to take it, because it was a bit of a radical departure, you know. At least we'd had 3 chords and maybe a change for the middle 8 even, you know. Suddenly this was just John just strumming on C rather earnestly.
George Martin took it very well. He said, "Rather interesting, John. Jolly interesting." I think this is quite cute because they didn't realize that George Martin had more experience with musique concrète than any of them.
I used to do a lot of experimenting with musique concrète. Speeding up tapes, making funny noises and plucking piano strings, that kind of thing.
Tape and electronics have brought an enormous new feel to music. It's surprising what you can do once you have a sound recorded on tape. You can speed it up, you can slow it down, you can turn it round back to front, you can compress it, equalize it, add echo. There's a whole range of things you can do.
In 1962, he had worked with Maddalena Fagandini of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop on an experimental single which featured a combination of tape loops, electronic sounds, and live instruments. It was released under the pseudonym Ray Cathode. It sounds like this. He'd also done a lot of work recording The Goon Show, and that obviously had required the use of a bunch of different sound effects. Just prior to the beginning of the recording sessions for Revolver, like a few days before, a very young Jeff Emmerich had been promoted from assistant engineer to main engineer, and he also had some experience working with tape loops, because he had worked on World Record Club sessions for some of their Shakespeare productions which used musique concrète as part of the show. So there are your main characters with their unique abilities and experiences. I don't mean to flog a dead metaphor, but by their powers combined,
By your powers combined,
they are about to summon a truly heroic piece of music. Okay, so it's day 1 of the recording sessions for Revolver. Yes, Tomorrow Never Knows is the very first thing that they worked on for this album, straight out the gate. Tomorrow Never Knows. Sure, John brings forward this song for them to work on. As we know, he has a head full of the psychedelic experience, which is very loosely based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And he may have had this on the brain because his first directive was that he wanted to sound like the Dalai Lama chanting from a hilltop with 1,000 Tibetan monks. And I said, it's a bit expensive going to Tibet. Can we make do with it here? It is Jeff Emmerich's first day on the job, and he is eager to win the approval of the Beatles because they're already a little bit wary of him, as they had a totally different engineer working with them on the previous couple of albums, and he's also a little bit younger than they are. But he put this nervous zeal to work. EMI Studios had a rotating Leslie speaker, which is usually connected to Hammond organs. It's what gives them their characteristic warble, and it looks like this. The Beatles had, in a sort of unorthodox fashion, connected the Leslie speaker to a guitar on It's Only Love. But Jeff decided to take this a step further and suggested that they feed John Lennon's microphone output through the Leslie speaker in order to achieve this Dalai Lama sound. This had never been done before. Here's George Martin's account. I spoke to Jeff Emmerich, the engineer, and he had a good idea. He said, let's try putting his voice through a Leslie speaker and back again and re-recording it. By putting his voice through that and then recording it again, you got a kind of intermittent vibrato effect. So it's day 1, they're already breaking new ground. But Jeff Emmerich made perhaps an even more revolutionary innovation on that same day. This next reading is from Jeff Emmerich's Here, There, and Everywhere. And don't come for me, I know that he's not always the most reliable narrator. But he was there, and we weren't, so we're going to give him the time of day, but we're going to take it with a grain of salt. Okay? Good. Concerned about the wear and tear on their expensive collection of microphones, the top studio brass had warned us never to place mics any closer than 2 feet to drums, especially the bass drum, which put out such a wallop of low frequencies. It seemed to me, though, that if I moved all the drum mics in closer, say just a few inches away, we would hear a distinctly different tonal quality, one which I thought would suit the song.
I knew I might get a bollocking from the studio manager for doing so, but my curiosity was piqued. I really wanted to hear what it would sound like. This is a huge part of why Revolver sounds so much punchier, so much heavier, and frankly, from a recording perspective, so much better than their previous albums. It is a good thing that this technological advance was made just in time to capture some of Ringo's best work as the drummer of the Beatles. Ringo says, "I was proud of my drumming on Tomorrow Never Knows, but I was quite proud of my drumming all the way through, really." Damn straight. The earlier drum takes of this song are played much more straight. But fairly early on, Paul McCartney pulled Ringo to the side and made some suggestions as to different patterns that he could explore. It's interesting because this gives us a glimpse into Paul's arrangement savvy. This wasn't just a suggestion for Ringo and for the drum part, but in fact was a suggestion for the entire rhythm section, because if you listen closely, you can hear that Paul on bass is reinforcing what Ringo is doing with the drums. That little skip-hop thing that happens in the middle of the bar, Paul's also doing that. It helps to drive the song along. Have a listen. The drum part goes bum, 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 and the bass part goes bum 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 ba-dun dum bum 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 ba-dun dum. Do you hear it? So that wasn't Paul just being like, "Ringo, this is how you play the drums." It was him going, "Hey Ringo, I think it would be really good if the two of us played this together. It would make the rhythm section stronger." Great arrangement choice there from young Paul McCartney. 23 years old at the time. And the end result is that Ringo's drum part just sounds like Ticket to Ride on steroids, you know? It sounds like he's unleashed a beast. Moving right along. Fairly momentous arrangement choice from Paul, but far from his most radical on this recording session. As we know, Paul has spent most of winter and early spring mingling with London's artsy counterculture, which was sort of a small niche scene. And he thought it would be a good idea to bring some of the concepts that he's been exploring and experiencing and absorbing to this new project with the Beatles. He had 2 Brunel machines, and he would use this to create these tape loops. He learned that you could unhook the erase head, so the tape would go round and round and round, but keep recording, and the tape would end up saturating. It was Paul really who experimented with his tape machine at home.
So I decided to do some of those loops that I've been doing on my own tape recorder.
He explained to the other boys how he had done this, and Ringo and George would do the same and bring me different loops of sounds. According to George Martin, in the end they brought 40 or 50 individual tape loops that they had made to the studio for him to listen to. Everybody went home and made up a spool, a loop. "Okay, class, now I want you all to go home and come back in the morning with your own loop." We were touching on the Stockhausen kind of avant-garde clue music. Ha ha ha. Ha ha. Editor Nancy here. I've just realised that the Storytime correspondent forgot to include one of the best anecdotes about the tape loops, so this is Ringo speaking. "I had my own little setup to record them. As George says, we were drinking a lot of tea in those days, and on all my tapes you can hear, oh, I hope I've switched it on. I'd get so deranged from strong tea, I'd sit there for hours making those noises." So he went through all of them, played them forwards, backwards at different speeds, and then selected a few that would work well for the song. These are the loops, in no particular order. 1. A clip of orchestral music. 2. Paul fiddling around on his mellotron on the string setting. 3. Paul fiddling around on his mellotron on the flute setting. 4. Georgia supplied sitar clips.
And the last one is Paul laughing. That sort of seagully sound. It's actually Paul laughing. Up until this point, I feel like George Martin didn't have much of a creative outlet in the Beatles. His job had basically been to make the odd suggestion and step back and make room for them to excel. But for this track, he had a specialized interest that was relevant to the successful execution of the track. And I feel like he was able to step into what was probably a role that was far more professionally challenging and intellectually fulfilling than the work that he had done previously with the band.
Yeah. I mean, he taught us a lot, and I'm sure we taught him a lot by our sort of primitive musical ability, which is all I have still. And so it was a mutual benefit society, whatever they call it. He had a very great musical knowledge and background, so he could translate for us and suggest a lot of things. Well, we'd be saying, well, they go ooh and ee, and he'd say, well, look, chaps, I thought of this afternoon, and I came up with this, and we'd say, oh, great, I'll put it on here,
To put these tape loops into the mix, they essentially commandeered the entirety of EMI Studios.
All over EMI Studios were tape machines with loops on them and people holding the loops at the right distance with a bit of pencil.
Each playing their individual clip. And then those tape machines were fed into the control room faders, and they could be brought up or brought down as the song was playing through. So they could be mixed in with the drum and the vocal take, and then that was recorded to tape. So essentially these faders were functioning almost as an instrument in and of themselves.
So the mix we did then was a random thing that could never be done again. Nobody else was doing records like that at the time.
With the act of capturing them on tape becoming this kind of improvisatory exercise, in that it was impossible to replicate exactly each time. And if this weren't enough innovation for a single song, let alone a single album, let alone a single band for that matter, John had complained about getting bored recording his double tracking. What that entails is John sings his vocal take, and then he has to go back and do it all over again so that they can combine the two layers and thicken the sound of his voice. He found it very tiresome. So engineer Ken Townsend effectively conceptualized automatic double tracking on the spot. It creates a delayed copy of the recorded audio and then plays it back at a slightly different speed in combination with the audio, so it sounds like two separate takes of the same song, but it only needs to have been recorded once. And we still use ADT in modern recording. George Harrison identified similarities between what John was trying to carry out with this song and the music that he had been familiarizing himself with over the break.
The indie music had come into our lives, and the way indie music just was all in one key. It didn't modulate.
I think Tomorrow Never Knows was the first one that stayed there. The whole song was on that one chord, but the basic sound all hangs on the one drone.
There are also only 6 melody notes in the song, so it's kind of like an Indian raga. So George plays the sitar and the tambura on this recording. You can hear it right at the top of the track. Absolutely perfect opener for the song as well, I gotta say. And Ringo? Well, naturally, he supplied the title. The song was originally going to be called The Void.
So I gave it a throwaway title because I was a bit self-conscious about the lyrics of Tomorrow Never Knows, so I took one of Ringo's malapropisms, which was like Hard Day's Night, and to take the edge off the heavy philosophical lyrics.
What can you say? What can you say? Oh, yeah. Tomorrow Never Knows.
Everyone brought their best to the studio for these sessions. As George describes, there were a number of experimental things that all came together on the same song. I would wager that some of it was luck. They had George Martin's experience that they could draw from. They had Jeff Emmerich's on-the-spot ideas. Some of it was probably down to the sabbatical. Having a break from their schedule gave the Beatles time to fill their heads with new ideas, which meant that they could come back to the studio at the end of their holidays and do a little show and tell for each other. The rest, though, was that ineffable Beatle magic. All of these disparate elements could have converged to no particular effect at all. But there's something about the combination of these 4 singular individuals and their stellar support team that results in something far, far disproportionately greater than the sum of its parts. But it sort of feels like we've been talking around the song.
let's give this wondrous thing a listen. John Lennon intended for this song to be a musical translation of the psychedelic experience. I think he probably succeeded, because it feels like in listening to the song you're stepping out of your regularly programmed consciousness and into something wholly novel, which is exactly what the psychedelic experience does. A few months after the recording, George Harrison said, and I quote, "This is easily the most amazing new thing we've ever come up with." And boy, he was not kidding. Here's a handful of things that I enjoy about the song. First thing is the way that it sneaks up on you. You don't know how long that drone is going to go on for. And it's sort of an unfamiliar, even slightly ominous sound, maybe. There's something creeping up on you and you don't know what it is, and then bam, the drums and the bass come in. And they're so powerful, they just completely knock you sideways. The next thing is that I think that John's natural slur is so perfectly suited to this song. He's singing it in a way that doesn't strictly adhere to the beats of the measures.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream.
If he were singing it in time, it would go, turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. Which, I don't have to tell you twice, sounds awful. Instead, it's like this, turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. It's very liquid, very malleable. I also think that the music and the lyrics are a great match for each other. They're otherworldly, but also radically modern. Like, how disappointing would this song be if all of this were happening musically, but the lyrics were mediocre? They're so quintessentially Lennon as well. It's scraps of things that he's been absorbing in the media, in books that he's reading, juxtaposed with his love of nonsense and wordplay. It's also kind of goon show.
For 10 years, Caesar ruled with an iron hand, then with a wooden foot, and finally with a piece of string.
Kind of Lewis Carroll. He's got lines like, play the game existence to the end of the beginning. Listen to the color of your dreams. Very abstract, very image heavy. Very John. Another thing. While the bass in this song stays on C, there is a portion at the end of each line where the chord changes down to a B flat. And it's an organ that's doing that, but there is also a clip that reinforces that. I think it's the orchestral one. There's like a moment of tension and then a resolution. It is not dying.
It is not dying.
Resolution. It's such a great delivery. Oh, love it. Love it! It's also very similar to what harmonically is being done in the previous song, Got to Get You Into My Life, where the bass is droning or staying on this one chord.
I was alone, I took a ride.
And then at the very end of each line, the chord over the top goes down a tone.
I didn't know what I would find there.
In fact, you could probably blend them. I wonder what that would sound like. Editor Nancy?
I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. On the road, maybe I could see another kind of life there.
Here's the next thing. This song could feel like the Beatles were just being pretentious and trying to be impressive and so very smart. But I don't think that it was that at all. I think that they were genuinely curious about exploring and maybe inadvertently expanding the limits of their chosen medium of music, of popular music. Quick digression, this is sort of why Revolution 9 doesn't work for me as well.
Number 9.
That does feel like John Lennon is trying to emulate something that is being done by people he admires. It feels like he is just copying. This doesn't feel like copying. This feels like something new. And it sounds like novelty that has happened upon innocently, genuinely, authentically. You know? I love that you can hear that the guitar has that trademark Revolver tone, even when it's being played in reverse. There are some people who I think are under the mistaken belief that that is the same solo from Taxman.
but played in reverse. And that, I think, is not the case. But just to make sure I'm right, this is what it sounds like played in reverse. I love that they switched to the Leslie vocal halfway through the song so that it sounds like John Lennon is kind of surrounding you, circling you, coming at you from different angles. This is what his voice sounds like at the beginning of the song.
Lay down for surrender to the void.
And then this is what it sounds like from like the halfway point in the song. Such an interesting tone they got out of that. What a great idea, Jeff Emmerich. Well done. I love how, even to my ears in 2024, this song still sounds so modern. It feels like it could have come out any time between 1966 and now. It sounds kind of like breakbeat tracks, you know? It's a really cool song. And the last thing, it's not the last thing, the last thing I can think of today that I really love about the song is that it feels like Paul and George have all the blow you away songs. You've got Paul doing Eleanor Rigby with only a string section.
Look at all the lonely people.
Whoa, what? I know that he did it on Yesterday, but still, there isn't even guitar on Eleanor Rigby. It's just Paul and strings on a pop record. What? Or like George's Love You Too? It is such a departure from what the Beatles have been doing in their popular music practice to this point. John feels kind of underrepresented in that respect on the album, but I love that he gets the big finish. I quoted George at the top of this section. Here's the rest of that quote. Some people might say it sounds like a terrible mess of sound. It's because of the electronics, which might throw you at first, but the song ought to be looked on as interesting if people listen to it with open ears. And he's right. I first heard this song as a 6-year-old, and to a 6-year-old, everything is novel. You have no precedent for what anything sounds like. But I'm now a much older listener to this song. I'm far more familiar with what it sounds like when music is electronically or digitally altered. And so I have to keep reminding myself that this was not the case for this song's original listeners in 1966. These guys were the first to do this in popular music. So for those mid-60s listeners, many of these sounds would have been totally unidentifiable, which I think would have made the song sound impossible and miraculous. Like, I listen to that and I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like something being played backwards. Oh yeah, that sounds like a loop of tape. And some of you won't have to imagine this, but for the rest of us, can you imagine listening to this and just having not a clue what it is that you're listening to or how these sounds have been made? What a cool experience. Let us conclude. This song represented a new frontier. It was the kickoff point for many things. It is the root of an entire tree of endless genres and subgenres of popular music to come. It was a radical reinvention of the recording practices of the time, and these new techniques were quickly adopted by all of the other studios because their artists were demanding that they make their rhythm section sound as good as this. It established a precedent for the kind of experimentation that up until this point was unique to these very specific circles of artsy people to go mainstream. Paul said something really interesting that I would like to quote for you now. We came down from the north, experienced London, where quite experimental things were happening, and we always thought the people back home would love to know. We felt like we were the megaphones. If it was happening to us and we like it, we should let them know. It would be good to pass on the good news. How altruistic. This resulted in an absolute explosion of creativity that lasted at the very least until the end of the decade. It gave artists license to be weird. And while this track is the start of many things, it is also a decisive end of the beginning. After the release of this album, the Beatles did one final tour, and they didn't play any of this material on the tour, quite simply because they couldn't. They couldn't execute it live. And sort of, almost cartoonishly, they finished their recording, they finished the tour, they disappeared for a bit, and then they all came back with big man moustaches.
Did you ever see a time when, in fact, you weren't working together?
I could see us working not together for a period, but we'd always get together for one reason or other.
Do you foresee a time when, in fact, the Beatles won't be together and that you'll all be on your own?
No.
Do you think that in the new year that you're going to be going your own ways instead of being a group?
No.
If you never toured again, would it worry you?
I don't know. No, I don't think so.
It's almost like a comical representation of their newfound maturity. Paul very proudly brought this work to Bob Dylan after they'd wrapped recording but before they had released, to show off what he'd been working on and what they had produced. And Bob Dylan said to him, "Oh, I get it. You don't want to be cute anymore. Allow me to rant briefly. This is the kind of insecure, too cool for school, soft boy nonsense that I used to come across from the private school bros when I was majoring in English at university. Process your envy elsewhere, Bobby." Having said that, he was not entirely off the mark. After listening to Tomorrow Never Knows, there is no way that you can mistake these Beatles for the lovable mop tops who broke onto the scene 3 years earlier. Even though, at the time of this recording, they were only aged between 23 and 25. These four guys had evolved into something unrecognizable from who they were in their earlier 20s. That stage of their lives was over. Tomorrow Never Knows signals the end of the beginning of the Beatles. That's it for me. Oh man, I'm sad that it's over. This has been such an incredible experience and such a journey going from track to track through this album. I'm so grateful to all of you who tuned in and went on this journey with me. It's been a massive undertaking, and I think it's probably the thing I am most proud of in my sort of YouTube channel and the things that I do in this corner of the internet. And I feel so honored and so pleased that you have shared this with me. So what's next? What now? I think I'd like to sort of round up the album a little bit. It feels kind of incomplete to just end on the last song and not look at the album as a whole. Look at the songs in the context of their greater project. So maybe some of that. I've had a lot of requests to cover the singles for this album. Twist my arm, I'll do it. I'm actually really excited about it. I'm so glad that you made that request. And then next year, I don't know, maybe we'll do this again with a new album. If that's something you might be interested in, let me know. And that's it. Well done if you made it all the way through to the end. If you enjoyed this series, I'll leave a link in the description for my Buy Me a Coffee, where you are most welcome to make a donation or sign up as a member if you wish, but no pressure, friends. If you're curious about what any of my original music sounds like, I will leave a link to that in the description as well. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you here next time. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks.